right, Karen, it's live on YouTube. It's all set, Emily.
Okay, thank you, Madam City Clerk. Good evening and welcome everybody to our regular Burlingame City Council meeting. Today is Tuesday, September 8th, 2020. We hope everyone had a wonderful and restful Labor Day weekend, and we're glad you're with us. I'm going to call this meeting to order. It's 7 p.m. And before we get started, I want to give the City Clerk an opportunity to explain to members of the public who may be joining us for the first time how you can participate in the meeting this evening.
Sure, yeah. Hi, everyone. So first thing I'd ask is that you all keep yourselves on mute and your video off. During public comment, feel free to turn your camera on if you're called on to speak. And if you would like to speak or have a comment during the meeting, there's a couple ways to do that. You can write into public comment at burlingame.org. You can raise your hand, which is a little feature on Zoom that lets me know you have something to say. Or you can Zoom chat, and the Zoom chat only goes to me, and then I'll read that onto the record. The only thing I'll say is that if you do have a comment, choose one of those options. You only get one chance to comment on all these, on the different items, and so just please be aware that if you chat, that counts as your comment, or if you speak, that counts as your comment. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Madam City Clerk. We appreciate the rules of the road there. So we'll get started as we always do with the second item on the agenda with the Pledge of Allegiance to the flag. So if you could stand and please join me if you are able, and begin. One moment. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, item number 3, we'll do the roll call. I'll turn that back over to our city clerk.
Councilmember Coulson?
Here.
Councilmember Brownrigg?
Here, struggling with.
Councilmember Ortiz?
Here.
Vice Mayor O'Brien?
Here.
Mayor Beach?
Here. Thank you. We have everybody in attendance. Item 4, we normally would have a report out from closed session, but we did not have a closed session this evening. So we'll move on to item number 5, which are announcements about upcoming events. And I do have a few items I'd like to share with the community. The first and foremost, thanks to the city clerk for her incredibly hard work getting the message out about getting out the vote. Regardless of where you stand on the issues or the candidates, please make sure that you vote in the election coming up this November. Ballots will be mailed starting October 5th. So everybody has the option to vote by mail. Couple things to remember: that you have 41 days left to register to vote for the November election. And if you are registered, please make sure you take time to review your vote status online. So there's a website right here. The city clerk can point that out as well. Also remember to sign up for an option of ballot tracking. There's the website right there at california.ballottracksnet.net/voter. This gives people the opportunity to find out when your ballot has been mailed to you, when it has been received by elections, and when it has been counted, so you can rest easy. You can be alerted by email or text, whatever is your choice. Madam City Clerk, is there anything else you'd like to say about elections?
No, I'll just also, am I unmuted? Yes.
Yep.
I guess I'll just also add that we have 4 ballot 24/7 drop boxes in the Burlingame area this year, which is very exciting, and I am thrilled about it. So please take advantage of those, and you can find out more information on our website, or when you pick up your library books, you'll get a little flyer with information as well.
Okay, thank you for that great information and for getting the word out. Also like to mention our Bayfront Cleanup Day is more than just one day this year. It's happening the whole month of September, every Saturday. We were sad not to be able to celebrate Earth Day's 50th anniversary in April with a big citywide cleanup. Instead, we punted it till September, and now we're going to be a part of a huge county effort to clean up our community. You can go to the City of Burlingame's website if you do a search for Bayfront Cleanup Day, and you can start from your front door. Everybody will take responsibility. You can download an app, check out directions of a short video on the website, and you can sign up to be a part of Team Burlingame, called the Burlingame Blue Whales, so that our city gets credit for all the trash we've picked up in our community. And it can be right outside your door on the Bayfront, wherever you feel safe and able to help pitch in. So please learn more about our Bayfront Cleanup Day every Saturday in September. Our bicycle pedestrian master plan virtual open house is now live on the website walkbikeburlingame.com. That virtual open house will be open through the 17th of September, and it's an opportunity to preview and make comments on various draft recommendations about how we're hoping to make walking and biking safer and more accessible in our community. September 10th at the Burlingame Public Library will be Poetry Night. Thursday, September 10th, 6 p.m. You can check out the library's website for more information. There is a drive-in movie happening on September 18th, Friday evening, thanks to the Parks and Recreation Department. It's Space Jam, 7:30 p.m. at the Burlingame Golf Center. Movie theaters haven't been something we've all been able to enjoy, but we still can enjoy a drive-in movie during the pandemic. You have to pre-register, so check out the Parks and Recreation Department website to register. Also, fall registration for activities and enrichment starts tomorrow. Finally, I also have an announcement about Saturday, the 10th of October, thanks to Burlingame Neighborhood Network. The 8th annual Burlingame Disaster Survival Drill will take place between 9 and 10:30 a.m. That's Saturday, the 10th of October. And in this age of, oh my goodness, pandemics, fires, in the region of earthquakes and floods, anything can happen. This is a great opportunity to practice how we can all care for ourselves and our neighbors around us. So there will be a socially distant drill, so you can do this from the comfort of your home, which is a good practice as well. So please find out more on our city's e-news or at the Burlingame Neighborhood Network website. And finally, this is the final push for the 2020 census. It's imperative that everybody is counted. Doesn't matter who you are, where you are from, everybody is valued, everybody is counted. If you get a phone call in the next few weeks, right before the end of September, it's safe. You can respond so that you're counted, and that way we make sure we get the appropriate political representation here in our area and the appropriate share of federal and state tax dollars coming to our community. So it's very important that everybody's counted. Colleagues, do we have any other announcements? I see Councilmember Coulson, go ahead.
Great, thank you. I again just want to remind everybody, I have more details this time of the San Mateo County Historical Association is putting on the History Makers dinner event. It will be Thursday, September 24th from 7 to 8 p.m. You can go onto their website, historysmc.org, and purchase individual tickets. It's going to be a really good time, and it features Chef Martin Yan of Yan Can Cook, and he is being honored for promoting Asian style food and teaching the preparation of this food to millions of people throughout television shows, cookbooks, and other media. This event will all be online, and he will be hosting a live cooking demonstration, which should be amazing and really fun. And Joel Riddell, Emmy Award-winning TV host, will be hosting the event. So if you are hanging around on Thursday night with not much to do, we hope you'll join us. And the money and the proceeds go to help us bring in over 20 to 30,000 of our most needy children throughout the county into a classroom setting in order to do field trips. I'm sure you all remember, if you had kids, to the Sanchez Adobe, to the Woodside store, and then also to the Redwood City Center. So please, if you can, join us.
Thank you so much, Councilmember Coulson. Colleagues, any other announcements? Seeing none. Madam City Manager, do you have any other announcements?
Just so you had asked me to talk about what's going on with the fires lately. So hot off the presses, as of just a couple minutes ago, CAL FIRE put out a press release that the CZU fire, which is the one in southern, sort of southwestern San Mateo County and northern Santa Cruz County, is 82% contained. So that's good news, 82% as of this evening, but it was 81 this morning. So slow going, I guess, in this last 20% or so. And then we had folks out at that fire, they came back, but now we have 2 battalion chiefs and an engine that are at the Creek Fire, which is the one burning just east of Fresno. So busy times for our fire agency and all the other fire agencies in the state. Our folks are part of a larger strike team from San Mateo County, and we wish them all the best and safe and speedy work so they can come back home. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that update. We know it's top of mind for many of us and our residents with the air quality being what it is. And we appreciate the great work that CCFD and some of our police department as well has been first responders. So thank you so much. With that, I think we will go ahead and move on then to, we don't have any presentations tonight, so we'll move on to item 7, which is public comments for items that are not on the agenda. So this is the time, if we don't have something on our agenda tonight, you can suggest an item for a future city council agenda. This would be the time to do that, or anything else that is on your mind. The Ralph M. Brown Act, which is the state agency open meeting law, prohibits our city council from acting or deliberating on any matter that is not on the agenda, but you're welcome to take this time to speak with us, and you can have 3 minutes to say what is on your mind. For those of you who are here to discuss the other main agenda item tonight on minimum wage, you'll have an opportunity to do public comment at a later time. So Madam City Clerk, if we have anybody who wishes to speak at this open public comment time.
We do. I have it. First, I'll read the email that I received, and then we can go to the public that are here.
Thanks.
So this one is from Manita, and he says, "Good evening, Madam Mayor, Honorable Council. There has been a lot of discussions offline and on social media about the Lion Hogue project. A lot of neighbors Burlingame-wide are paying attention. It sounds like council adopted a draft version of the plan in its May 2020 council meeting, which is good. Could the city clarify at what level of draft the council adopted the plan? Was it a 30% draft, a 50% draft, a 75%, or a 90% draft? Secondly, will the final plan be coming back to council for final adoption, or is the draft sufficient? There are a number of items in the plan that will yield significant benefits to residents. The trial speed bumps and one of the traffic circles, for example. But there are a number of other ones that deserve closer attention prior to being implemented. I hope council will consider the feasibility of the improvements as well as the order in which they are implemented. Given limited public funds, it behooves us to be strategic. Painting lines on the street is an expensive undertaking, but it is called out to be an early measure. We have painted lines on several Burlingame streets, and yet they don't result in lower speeds or better driver behavior. I hope the city does a sample block or 2 before going for the entire grid. Finally, I hope the city communicates which specific measures and elements council has decided to fund. The website could be updated to say exactly which measures are going to construction later this year. This description of scope, scheduled, and funding would be great to see on the city's already excellent Lion Hogue traffic calming website. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam City Clerk. That's a lot of information, so I think staff can best follow up with that via email. I'll give, and we can't deliberate on that because it's not on the agenda, but I'll just ask the city manager if you'd like to make any further comment, or we'll just leave it for email follow-up.
That is not for us to comment on because of Brown Act reasons. And so we will leave it for Public Works to take a look at. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay.
And then next we have Peter Camarado with his hand up. Peter?
Yes, can you hear me?
Mhm.
Oh, perfect. Thank you. Madam Mayor and honorable council members, thank you for your time tonight. On August 31st, 2020, sorry, not on August 31st, August 31st, I submitted a letter to the council at large. I received 2 responses. The content of the letter was pretty simple, ADU timelines. I've waited 190 days for a permit for a simple ADU approval. A client of mine's been waiting for 111 days and continues to wait to this day. Over the last few years, many of the council members have been strongly advocating for affordable housing in Burlingame. State of California sent a clear message. We want ADUs and we're going to make it easy, quick, and simple. We're lucky to have, and truly, truly lucky to have, a group of outstanding council folks, staff, highly educated people that understand their jobs very well. I can't emphasize that enough. I've had the opportunity to also speak with many local developers, architects, engineers, and residents. What I found was there have been some significant delays in many instances, and there were a few reasons for that. One, it's the client, would be me. Sometimes it's the architect, sometimes it's the city. Those are the three stakeholders, really. And what I found was that each of us has responsibility to resolve our items independent of the other, and maybe perhaps together. I created a suggestion based on one of the council members' questions to me on how we could potentially help make this system more accountable, both for within the city and to the citizens at large and those that are submitting plans. And it's relatively simple, and it is really surrounding communication. I will tell you, in the last 5 days, I probably had 30 emails back and forth from different departments. Now, I know people don't want to communicate that way. They'd rather pick up the phone or meet in person, myself included. I think it's just the nature of where we are in our environment. What I'm hoping is somebody on council or collectively, you could come together, maybe say, hey, let's get a couple of folks, maybe 3 people, 2 people, 1 person. Let's get together with staff and maybe some of the departments and come up with a plan or a system that can help make everybody's life a little bit more streamlined. I know I don't know how much more time I have. I can talk more, but I'd like to just stop there. And once again, thank everybody really for reaching out to me. And I feel confident now that you may have thought the issue was maybe not real. Hopefully now you think it's an issue, and you might hopefully pay a bit more attention to it. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Camarado. We appreciate your comments very much, and we appreciate you sticking to 3 minutes. Again, we can't deliberate on this, but we'll take that into consideration and follow up. At this time, do we have any other public comment items for items not on the agenda?
We do not.
Okay, then we will move on to item 8, which is our consent calendar. Items on the consent calendar are usually approved in one single motion unless anyone pulls them for a separate discussion. So I'd like to ask if any colleagues wish to pull an item from the consent calendar at this time. I see Councilmember Brownrigg has his hand up, so why don't you go ahead and unmute and let us know which item.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'd like to briefly discuss item 8B and 8H.
Okay, item 8B and 8H. All right, other colleagues who wish to pull an item off the consent calendar? I don't see any other hands up at this time. I'll ask if any member of the public, oh wait, I see Vice Mayor O'Brien has her hand up. Yes, which item?
I'm not here to take off an item. I was just raising hand to make a motion.
Oh, sorry, thanks. Let's see if any members of the public wish to pull an item.
No, we don't have any.
Okay, and I don't see any members of the public with their hand up. So with that, Vice Mayor, did you have a motion?
Sure. I will move to approve items 8A, C, D, E, F, and G.
Second.
Thank you. We have a motion from the Vice Mayor and we have a second from Councilmember Ortiz. We'll take a roll call vote.
Councilmember Coulson,
Yes.
Councilmember Brownrigg,
Yes.
Councilmember Ortiz,
Yes.
Vice Mayor O'Brien,
Yes.
Mayor Beach.
Yes. Okay, that motion passes unanimously. Councilmember Brownrigg, go ahead on item 8B.
Thank you. I didn't notice if Director Gardner is on the line, but he usually is. And so this concerns a simple extension of a contract to MIG consultants who've done a great job for us in writing our general plan. And my question is really an operational one. We note in the staff report that we expect it to take 9 months to go through the zoning hearings. And I wondered if it were possible to compress that. It feels to me like we've had the general plan under review for a very long time. I'm not asking staff to take more on. I know this is a difficult time for staff, but I wondered if we really needed the full 9 months, because so much hinges on getting the zoning right. And yet, while it's in abeyance, then people are kind of guessing. So I just really wanted to see if that timetable we might be able to compress it to deliver more certainty to everybody.
The timeline is based on what we've discussed with other cities in terms of what they encountered in the hearing process. It is a rewrite of the entire zoning code, so every single chapter. And our expectation is there will be interest in looking at each of those chapters carefully, which does take time. Should instead the direction be to just look at the whole code as one document and look at it in a faster time frame, we certainly could support that. So I think we were just anticipating a kind of standard level of review, which is, there's a lot of interesting things to discuss, but if the sentiment is to just kind of look at it all as one fait accompli, we're happy to do that too.
Well, I'm certain, I don't know if colleagues may want to comment. I'm certainly not advocating to rush, or to do a hasty job. But I do think having the rules in place, sooner rather than later just helps on a lot of different matters. And then I guess my follow-up question, Mr. Gardner, is to the extent, how does, there's a lot of important changes that we made in our general plan that I think we're all very proud of. So how does somebody track whether the zoning is elaborating or taking it in a different direction? I mean, how does one stay on top of making sure the zoning doesn't undercut what we tried to do with the general plan? Do you have any advice as to how one sort of stays on top of that unwieldy process?
Well, it is unwieldy, which is probably another reason we anticipate 9 months, because what you have to do is basically every decision that goes into amending the zoning needs to be tracked against what the general plan is providing direction for. General plan is the top of the hierarchy, so the zoning needs to be brought into compliance. So whenever we get to kind of a fork in the road, we say, well, what does the general plan tell us? And it's easy when it's a new policy and we just implement it. It can be a little harder when it's a gray area where there's a judgment call. And that's where we anticipate there would probably be more input from both the Planning Commission and the City Council on, certain items. We don't expect a line by line review, but we have, as we've been reviewing the draft code on the staff level, we've been identifying issues that we think are of interest to the City Council and to the Planning Commission that are those kind of pivot points where you're needing to make some interpretation on how the regulation manifests the policy itself.
Well, thank you. And I'll close with this. I appreciate this. I support, of course, extending the contract. I think MIG has done good work. I do think, I think it's way more productive to focus time and go deep on the few issues that are really challenging or tricky that emerge rather than try to do, a global rewrite. So I have very high confidence in your ability to manage the project, but I did want to ask about that timeline, and thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Brownrigg. Colleagues, does anybody else have questions for Mr. Gardner or on this item? Seeing no other hands raised, I'll open it up to public comment.
We don't have any comments.
I see one hand raised. This is on this particular item 8B, which is the amendment to the MIG update on the general plan zoning ordinance.
I think she just lowered her hand.
Okay, sounds good. Then with that, we'll close public comment and
Mayor, happy to make a motion to approve item 8B, and thank you for indulging those questions.
Thank you. I heard a motion from Councilmember Brownrigg. Is there a second?
Second.
Second, Councilmember Ortiz. We'll take our roll call vote.
Councilmember Coulson,
Yes.
Councilmember Brownrigg,
Yes.
Councilmember Ortiz,
Yes.
Vice Mayor O'Brien,
Yes.
Mayor Beach.
Yes. Motion passes unanimously. Moving on to item 8H, we'll turn it back to Councilmember Brownrigg for your questions.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Not a question, just a suggestion. I understand full well that we haven't reviewed this at council level and there are no decisions, but to the extent that we're going to be soliciting candidates for the Traffic Safety and Parking Commission, I would appreciate it if somehow in the notice it was noted that council will be considering whether to move the teaspoon to a twice a month format. I think anybody who applies ought to know that it at least is under consideration in the future, so that they don't get involved in something that they might not be able to address. So that's my suggestion.
Thank you, Councilmember
Come
Brownrigg.
back to the notice.
Colleagues, do we have any other questions or comments for staff on this? Seeing none, I will take this, open this item up for public comment. Anybody wishes to speak on this
Received
item?
no emails and there's no one's hand up.
Okay. With that, we will close public comment on this item and I will entertain a motion.
Motion to approve?
Second.
Thank you. Motion made by Vice Mayor O'Brien, seconded by Councilmember Coulson. And we have to take a roll call vote on Zoom, so we'll proceed with that.
Councilmember Coulson,
Yes.
Councilmember Brownrigg,
Yes.
Councilmember Ortiz,
Yes.
Vice Mayor O'Brien,
Yes.
Mayor Beach.
Yes. Motion passes unanimously. Thank you, colleagues. So we'll at this time move on to public hearings, item 9A, which is the introduction of an ordinance to establish a local minimum wage here in Burlingame. And this is really a continuation of a robust study session we had back on, I believe it was February 3rd, where we gave direction to continue this item and consider an ordinance. And at this point, I'll turn it over to our city manager, Lisa Goldman.
Thank you, Mayor Beach, members of the council. I am getting an unstable internet message here. So this is the joys of doing council meetings from your house. So hopefully I won't leave you unexpectedly. And if I do, I'll come right back. So we are here to talk about whether or not you're interested in introducing an ordinance for a local minimum wage in Burlingame. I'm going to go through the staff report and then I'll ask Kathleen to talk through the ordinance because she's the one who drafted it. And then if you have specific questions about the survey we did, I know that Joe Sanfilippo, our economic development and housing specialist, is on, and he's the one who created the survey and knows how to work SurveyMonkey. So he is better equipped than I am to talk you through any nuances of that survey. So little background, the minimum wage in California has been increasing every year since 2017. There's a chart in your staff report that shows what the current minimum wage is and future minimum wage for all areas that don't have their own minimum wages. And so right now in California, we are at $12 an hour for employers with 25 employees, or it should say fewer, and then $13 per hour for the larger 26 and above employees. It's going to go up by an hour, it's going to go up by $1 per hour for each of those groups until the 26 employees or more hits $15 an hour on January 1st, 2022. The smaller employers hit $15 an hour the following year. And then the next year, once everyone's caught up to the $15, the rate will get adjusted annually for CPI. So that'll start January 1st, 2024. So this is a chart that comes straight out of the state's, I believe it's Department of Industrial Affairs, Industrial Relations. The minimum wage for the state cannot be lowered, even if there's a negative CPI. So we'll see what CPI is for this year. The highest raise allowed in any 1 year is 3.5%. So that's what's going on at the state. As the mayor mentioned, you had a study session back in February to discuss your interest in moving forward with a local minimum wage here. And I've attached to your staff report, the staff report from February 3rd, minutes from that study session. You heard from quite a few speakers that evening, and a majority of you indicated your interest in moving further with consideration of a local minimum wage ordinance that would be effective January 1st of 2021. And so that would be in 1 year in advance of the state reaching $15 an hour for the larger employees. larger employers. You asked that we use the city of San Mateo's ordinance as a model. And so that's what our city attorney used when she was drafting the ordinance, and the San Mateo ordinance is attached to your staff report. So by law, cities are allowed to do their own local minimum wage ordinances to be off sync with the state. And there's lots of cities in the Bay Area that have elected to do so. I have in here the list of all the cities in San Mateo County who have moved forward with local minimum wage ordinances. This chart is very similar to what you saw in February, but East Palo Alto is now on the chart. They did their minimum wage. They did second reading and adoption just at their last meeting. So just before I finished the staff report. And so I have this sorted. It's not alphabetically. So if you're confused at all, it's sorted by what the minimum wage will be in 2021. So everyone on this list in 2021 will be at $15 an hour or above. So some started at 15 this year, some started even higher this current year, 2020, and then they added a CPI on. And so you'll see the lowest level in 2021 is $15 an hour, and then it goes all the way up to Belmont at $15.90 an hour. And so that's for 2021. And then in 2022, they all have a CPI escalator. So everybody does CPI. And some have a limit on the CPI and some go, so the lowest limit is Menlo Park with 3%. And then there's some that have a 3.5% limit, which matches the state. And then others have no limit. And so that's the picture here in San Mateo County. Minimum wage for all of these cities applies to all adults and minors who work 2 or more hours per week, and that is matching the state. And then there's this little extra classification for what are called learners, and that's just a certain number of hours for people in certain areas of employment, and they can be paid no less than 85% of the minimum wage, but just their first 160 hours of employment. So basically, once they get trained up, they go back into the regular minimum wage classification. And tips and other benefits may not be considered as an offset to the minimum wage. Several cities in the Bay Area, including Redwood City and San Mateo, participate in a joint contract with the city of San Jose. They have an Office of Equality Assurance. It's part of their Public Works Department that provides enforcement for the local minimum wage ordinance. And cities do that because it's just, they're too small to be able to take on this duty themselves. When I finalized the staff report and hit send on the whole thing, I had not been able to reach anyone in San Jose. Like many of us, they are sheltering at home and working remotely. And so I had not been able to get in touch with them, but I did have a meeting on Friday over a better Zoom connection and talk to somebody who runs the Office of Equality Insurance. They currently have, I believe, 10 cities plus San Jose, so 11 cities total that they're enforcing minimum wage for. And the San Carlos figure of 15,000 was because they take the cost of an employee and then they split it evenly among the cities. If we come in, that brings the cost down for all of us. So our cost would probably be closer to about $13,500, $13,500 per year. And so I have a copy of their contract if we choose to go that route, if we move forward. If the council does want to go forward with the minimum wage, I would recommend that we do this through San Jose. They're sort of the only ones in the game at this price point, and we are just too small to do this on our own. The nice thing about this, they also will calculate the minimum wage for you as you add CPI on. They'll prepare all the required noticing and all that good stuff. So they sort of take care of everything. When we talked in Millbrae, one of the council members, it may have been Mayor Beach, mentioned that Millbrae was also talking about doing a local minimum wage. I have not been able to find out any information about whether they're moving forward or not. Like many of us, they are probably caught up in the world of COVID and get sidetracked from many of the goals you thought you were going to be working on this year, have gone into the back burner. So there's lots of cities around us, not just in our county, that have local minimum wages. So in Santa Clara County, they have Cupertino, Los Altos, Milpitas, Mountain View, Palo Alto, San Jose, Santa Clara, and Sunnyvale all have local minimum wages. They all include a CPI escalator. And in those cities, they're actually all higher than what we're talking about. The lowest rate in those cities is $15.25. And then it looks like the highest rate is 1605. And so that's for the current calendar year. And then they all have escalators, CPI escalators for future years. San Mateo County does not have a minimum wage for the unincorporated areas, but it does have a living wage ordinance for its own contractors. And so that sets a minimum wage. The contractors are required to pay employees providing services under county contracts. So the folks that they hire have to ensure that they're paying these higher wages. And it's quite high, actually. The current wage as of July 1st is $17.19, so $17.19. On July 1st of 2021, it will increase by CPI, and it's actually set to sunset on June 30th, 2022. We'll see if they sunset it or if they extend it. And then just another neighbor, they're a little bit farther north of us, but they do affect us because SFO is so close. So the City and County of San Francisco has a minimum wage ordinance and a minimum compensation ordinance. So their minimum wage increased from $15.59 to $16.07 on July 1st. And their minimum compensation ordinance is a little bit similar to what San Mateo County has. And this covers most city service contractors and tenants at SFO. And so that's, just north of us. Under the minimum compensation ordinance, employers must provide their employees with no less than the minimum compensation wage rate, which is let's see, it's $17.66 an hour, going up to $18.24 an hour for for-profit employers, and then nonprofit and public entity employers will be at $16.50. And so SFO does have that ordinance bringing the wages up. So again, I won't go into the details of the ordinance, but I will just mention kind of the highlights. Minimum wage is set at $15 per hour starting January 2021, and that is for all businesses. So flat rate, unlike the state, which is going smaller businesses and larger businesses by number of employees and ratcheting up until everyone gets to 15. This ordinance, like many of the cities, actually all the cities in San Mateo County have just gone in with some kind of flat ordinance, except for San Mateo, which had a differentiation between nonprofits and for-profit entities. And that differentiation has gone away by now. That was a few years ago. And then one of the things that came up during your February study session that was of interest was put into the ordinance. So business owners do not have to pay first degree relatives the increased minimum wage. So if you are hiring your kid or your parent, I believe those are all first degree relatives, you don't have to pay them the increased minimum wage. You will have to handle the fallout of that in your own house, but for purposes of the ordinance, you don't have to pay it. But all other requirements of state law continue to apply. Back in the February study session, Mayor Beach noted that she had reached out to a number of members of the Burlingame business community, including retailers and restaurateurs, to seek input. And there was a request for that information, and that summary spreadsheet is included in your attachments. I won't go through it, but you have it there before you. And then we did a very non-scientific local minimum wage survey. We used SurveyMonkey. We took a survey that actually Joe found from the city of Alameda. And then we added to it some questions I received from City of Redwood City. They surveyed their business community. Alameda's was more of a community resident type of a survey. And so we kind of mushed them together into one survey. We sent the link out to the survey. It was in our city's e-newsletter twice. We posted it on Nextdoor. We sent it to the Chamber of Commerce, to the Downtown Burlingame Business Improvement District, to the Broadway Business Improvement District, to ask them to send it out to their members. We shared it with the hoteliers. We sent an email out to everybody who had signed up for Burlingame Talk Shop from back when Councilmember Colson was mayor, and we had that great workshop. And so we spread it fairly wide. We got 200 responses, which is pretty good actually, for something that does not affect everyone in town, but it does affect enough people that they were curious and wanted to respond. And so we got 200 responses. 173 of those respondents live in Burlingame, and 59 own a business in Burlingame. So clearly some of the respondents who live here also own a business. It's not two separate circles. There's a Venn diagram going on there. We attached the overall survey responses. It's a little bit confusing, but questions 7 and 8 were not just pick one. And so those answers are at the end of the document. And we We also have two subsets of the responses, and one is everyone who checked that they were a resident, and one is everyone who checked that they were a business owner. So there's different ways to cut the data. So among people who checked that they were residents, 125 responded that they were strongly or somewhat in favor of an increase in the minimum wage. And then 46 were somewhat or strongly against an increase. And then among the business owners, 30 were strongly or somewhat in favor, and 29 were somewhat or strongly opposed. So they were really pretty evenly matched there, with the residents much larger tilt towards go forth. I wanted to follow up on questions from the February study session. There were questions about childcare. Council members expressed concern about the impact of a higher minimum wage on childcare providers in Burlingame and whether childcare would become unaffordable. So in 2017, First Five San Mateo County and the Child Care Partnership Council conducted a study of early childhood education workforce compensation practices in center-based programs within San Mateo County. I have a Building Our Future flyer that those organizations put out. Shows that the lowest paid employees in these programs were on average making more than $15 an hour at the time of the survey. I have no data about home-based childcare providers, so they may be paying significantly less, they may be paying the same. I just don't have that data. It was not available to me in any kind of easily findable format. Business closures in local cities with a local minimum wage ordinance. One council member asked back in February whether San Mateo County cities that had already implemented local minimum wage ordinances had any data with respect to businesses closing or reducing full-time employees to part-time status. So I reached out to the city managers for the cities that had had their ordinances in place for a little while. So that was Belmont, Menlo Park, Redwood City, San Mateo, South San Francisco. All of those cities have a 2020 minimum wage of $15 an hour or above. I heard back from Belmont, Redwood City, and San Mateo city managers that some of their businesses had warned that this would happen, that they would have to close or reduce full-time to part-time when they were, prior to passage of the ordinance. But once the ordinance went through, they had no data indicating that that had actually happened. And they didn't know of any businesses that had actually closed because of that or converted full-time staff to part-time staff as a result of the higher minimum wage. All of this went into effect pre-COVID, so we're in a different world now. City of San Mateo noted, city manager noted that prior to the pandemic, many of their businesses already had to pay a higher wage due to the tight labor market they were dealing with. So they were already, a lot of their businesses were already in that place of having to pay more than minimum wage. City of Menlo Park city manager responded that the city had received a number of complaints from restaurants and 2 merchants in the early stages of implementation, but no complaints since then. Again, what they're hearing now is more COVID related. And then I have not heard back from City of San Francisco city manager, so I cannot respond about what's going on there. The other cities that are in the list for San Mateo County have passed ordinances, but the ordinances aren't in effect yet, or they haven't reached 15 an hour yet. So I did not contact them. And then finally, the last question was about whether there could be exemptions made for family members and babysitters, and the answer is yes. So the attached ordinance exempts family members of business owners, which are defined as first-degree relatives. Minimum wage requirement applies to those persons who meet the definition of employee under the state labor code, and that is most people providing ad hoc services such as babysitters and independent contractors would be exempt from the minimum wage. And again, if you have questions about that, it's written into the ordinance, and Kathleen hopefully can help you through that. And then fiscal impact was a little bit hard for us to figure out because most of our employees are making more than minimum wage. Many of the employee classifications that we have who are making what's currently minimum wage or just above or somewhere in the neighborhood of, somewhere in the 14s or just above $15 an hour. Most of those classifications were in our casual employees. Those are the folks that unfortunately most of them we laid off when COVID hit, and we weren't offering the programs that we used to offer. So a lot of folks in our library, in our recreation programs. So we just don't have the same number of people that we used to have. We used to have 3 police services who were making a starting salary below $15 an hour. We're now down to 1. So we've just had a lot of those folks go away, and we don't know when they'll come back. Hopefully someday we'll all be on better financial footing and we'll be able to bring those folks back, but we just don't know when that'll be. So it was really hard for us to get an overall annual financial impact. For rec programs back in the day when things were different, we would pass increased costs along to our user groups. But, you know, it's different times. The council may decide to not pass full increases along and rather to subsidize using general fund. So that is an option for our recreation programs. And with that, I will stop talking. If you have any questions for me, I'm happy to answer them. If you have questions for Kathleen about the ordinance, I'll speak for her and say she's happy to answer for them. And then Joe is on if you have questions about the survey. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam City Manager, for the thorough briefing, and to all the staff for putting together all the supporting materials for tonight's meeting. I want to open it up. We have procedures that we have to follow for such a meeting such as this because we are considering an ordinance. So we're receiving at this point the staff report. We're going to first allow council members to ask questions of staff. Once those questions have been asked, and we're really going to try to keep them to questions at this point. At that point, I will then request that the city clerk reads the title of the ordinance, and then we'll begin a public hearing. So at that point is when members of the public can participate. So let's invite city council members to ask any clarifying questions at this time first. I see Vice Mayor O'Brien has her hand up. Go ahead.
So the question I have is, do we have any positions then currently that the city has that we pay less than $15 an hour?
We have positions. We don't necessarily have people in those positions. So
Okay.
we have approved.
In positions then that have not been filled? So there's no personnel.
Well, no, they tend to be, they tend to be our casual employees. So those folks have been laid off.
Right, so they've been laid.
They're just.
So how many people were that, or how many people?
I don't unfortunately have that information. I think Sonia's on. She may remember that, and if so, she can shoot me a little chat, and then I'll be able to tell you. But I don't unfortunately know that information.
I see Sonia's on. So do you want to answer,
I
Sonia?
just don't know if she has
that. I don't have numbers of exactly how many people were laid off that were having, we're at that salary. I can find out for you.
Okay, that'd be great. And then, so secondly, then still a follow-up question. So are you saying then, Lisa, there are no personnel currently that make less than $15 because they've been laid off?
No, I'm not saying that. I'm saying that most of those folks are no longer with us, but we probably have a few people here and there. Margaret just sent me a note that she thinks they have a couple who make less than 15.
Okay.
I don't know the numbers of exactly who, because it's just pretty few and far between. We do have a roll-up issue in some areas where if we raise the bottom classification to get it to 15 or higher, then you have compaction issues. So you have to raise, if you have I don't know what the classification would be. If you have like a clerk and then a senior clerk, you would have to raise the senior clerk if you raise the clerk position.
Yeah, between the two.
Those are not the right titles, but that's the concept.
That was my next question. So then, I mean, it would have been nice to have an analysis of all that because one level of an increase affects other levels. And we do not know what that total amount of money could potentially cost the city at this time, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. And then the other question I have is in regard to the businesses, did they actually try to get the data of businesses that went out of business? The San Mateo, Redwood City, et cetera, because they said they had complaints and they said that there were businesses that were quite concerned, but did they actually follow up with those concerns?
So I don't know what methodology they used. My question was, do you have any data as to this phenomenon happening? And they said they did not have any data.
Okay, so we really don't know whether or not those cities that experienced concerns from the businesses, if they even actually touched base with those businesses at any time.
I don't know that information, correct.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you, Vice Mayor O'Brien. I see other colleagues have their hand up. Councilmember Coulson, go ahead with your questions.
Thank you. So I have just one, and it pertains to the actual code. So I think Kathleen is the person to which I am directing this question. And I'm looking specifically at section 6.10.060, waiver through collective bargaining. And I'm just wondering if she could explain that paragraph.
This is what I get for trying to alternate between screens and then I can't find my mute button. So yes, this is actually taken from the council's direction to look at San Mateo as a model, and this was in San Mateo's adopted ordinance, so we imported it over here. The basic idea being that, you know, from a policy perspective, if you were to do this, the idea is to handle issues for employees at a particular place on the wage scale, and that if they are represented, then they can come to a different conclusion through union bargaining. But there are conditions under which a collective bargaining agreement could divert from the minimum wage. So basically what that comes down to is that if there's a collective bargaining agreement that qualifies under this section, that would be a way out of what would otherwise be a direct requirement by the city, that if there's a union that's represented them and they've come to this conclusion jointly, then that can substitute for the ordinance provisions here for those people who are covered by the collective bargaining agreement.
So I just want to make sure I have this totally understood. So first of all, does this just apply to the city of Burlingame, or does it apply to any collective bargaining unit that, for example, you know, so like a hotel in addition to the city of Burlingame? And so just to put this in non-lawyer speak for me, what this means is that if our union asks me, for example, were to come to us and say, you know, we don't want to fire 3 people because of COVID and our budget constraints and the fact that we have these minimum wage going throughout and it's costing us more money, we can waive the minimum wage and agree to a lower wage in order, and it would circumvent this ordinance because this language is in here.
Right, and in answer to your other question, it would apply to other union represented groups. So if there's a hotel local something or other and they bargain for a different outcome, as long as those are, you know, properly recognized collective bargaining agreements and unions, then they would be able to come to a different conclusion. But the agreement has to say on its face, it has to acknowledge the minimum wage and that they're departing from it. The public policy behind that, to surmise, is that, you know, they may want something else instead. Like you say, they may want to keep more jobs at, you know, 1470 than lose a few in order to get to 15, or they may prefer richer medical benefits in exchange for a lower hourly wage. As long as they're adequately represented, this allows a collective bargaining agreement to kind of step in to this space.
Okay, so thank you, Kathleen. That's what I thought it said. I just want to make it clear, and I appreciate you expressing that. In fact, this just transferred over from the San Mateo division and wasn't necessarily the brainchild of you or any of our staff. So I appreciate that. Well, and I'm just going to say that given, you know, we had probably nearly every single letter that I received that was focused on this minimum wage was from a union sponsored person or a union representative. I find it very odd that we would then write exculpatory language into the ordinance that would allow them, the unions, to circumvent the minimum wage while forcing all the nonprofit and for-profit people that work in the city who may also want to trade minimum wage for maybe better healthcare benefits or more flexibility or, travel reimbursement or something. And we would not allow our business community the same opportunity. So I'm just going to point that out, that I find this to be something I personally could not agree to and live with.
Thank you, Councilmember Coulson. Do you have any other questions before I move on to Councilmember Brownrigg? Okay, thanks, Councilmember Brownrigg. I see your hand is up.
Yeah, thank you. I'll just say at the front end that I hope that we can reach a meeting of the minds tonight. I know this is a controversial issue, but I'm hopeful that we can. I was also puzzled by that same provision that Councilwoman Coulson flagged about collective bargaining being an escape clause from minimum wage. And therefore, I would hope that some of the union representatives who are here tonight might address that point, because I found it curious as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate that comment. Are there any other questions at this point or clarifications for staff on the staff report or the supporting info? If not, I know we have many members of the public who are probably here because they wish to speak. So I'll pause one more time for colleagues' questions. Seeing none, then we'll follow our procedure, and I will request that the city clerk read the title of the proposed ordinance.
Mayor Beach, I think that the vice mayor might have another question.
Yes.
I'm sorry, I didn't see the hand up. Go ahead.
This is actually toward our city attorney, Ms. Kane. And I don't know the rules with this, and this is why I'm asking the question. Is there a certain threshold that employers have to offer benefits? Is it based on the number of hours worked? Is it like 30 hours, 24 hours? Do we know?
I'm sorry, I don't know the answer to that. In fact, one of our union folks might know better than I do. That would be under the labor code. There are certain provisions, and Sonia knows this as well. Depending on the number of hours you work, at a point you are required to allow sick leave, 3 days a year. You also have to provide access to, if you have the right number of employees and the right number of hours that someone is working. Under the ACA, you have to provide access to healthcare. So there are certain sort of other tripwires that occur, but those are all a function of outside law. So it kind of depends on the configuration of how many employees and how many hours they're working.
Okay.
But I would defer to Sonia's summary of that.
Because the other question I would have is then if the council were to move forward to increase the $15 an hour, would employers then decrease the amount of hours and then the people lose their benefits as an unintended consequence?
I think that you've seen that elsewhere in the labor market. For example, there are a lot of, chain coffee stores and so on that keep people under the 32 hours a week threshold that the ACA kicks in at. So there is always, a trade-off that can be identified for various businesses at various thresholds. But this ordinance is fairly straight. I designed it to be as straightforward as possible to take San Mateo's and then kind of remove excess portions there so that it's at least relatively easy to understand to whom it applies. But Sonia might have more information about those benefit threshold issues than I do, because I never trust my memory. I always have to look it up.
Well,
Thank you.
as a quick sidebar comment, this is also what AB 5 was all about, and indirectly, who's
Exactly.
right, and it's
right.
Complicated.
And that is subject to the election this year and so on. So a lot of these things have a lot of moving parts, which is in fact why we were trying to design this to refer outside for the definition of who is an employee, and to make sure it's clear that all other state law requirements apply, state and federal law requirements apply. This isn't meant to mess with any of those separately existing and state and federal level definitions.
Thank you for that explanation. But Vice Mayor, is there further follow-up, or did you get what you needed there? Okay.
I think Sonia might be able to weigh in quickly on the benefits
Okay,
question though,
sure,
because
go
she knows
ahead.
more than I do.
Thank you, Ms.
Yes,
Morrison.
yes, I can if you want. So the sick leave law, which is 3 days of sick leave, is for all employers. So there are some, you can accrue it, you can delay people from using it for the first 90 days of their employment, but it is 3 days over 12 months that they can use that. They can,
Yahoo! Mario time!
Thank you. If everybody could make sure that they have their, who's not speaking at this time is on mute, that would be very helpful. And our city clerk can probably help with us as well. Let's see, colleagues, before we read the title of the ordinance, do we have anybody else who has a clarification question from City Council? All right. Seeing no other questions at this time from colleagues, I will follow our procedure and request that the city clerk read the title of the proposed ordinance. Madam City Clerk?
City of Burlingame ordinance, adding chapter 6.10 minimum wage to title 6 business licenses and regulations of the Burlingame Municipal Code.
Okay, thank you. So we need a motion to waive further reading and introduce the ordinance at this time.
So moved.
Motion made by Councilmember Brownrigg. Do we have a second? I will second. We'll take a roll call vote.
Councilmember Coulson,
So Megan, we're voting right now on to
introduce
just put the, to introduce the ordinance. Okay. Yes.
Councilmember Brownrigg,
Yes.
Councilmember Ortiz,
Yes.
Vice Mayor O'Brien,
Yes.
Yes.
Mayor Beach.
Yes. All right, so we have unanimously decided to waive further reading and introduce the ordinance. And at this time, we will spend the next few minutes conducting a public hearing. And this is the opportunity for members of the public to take turns when called upon by the city clerk to speak. And I'm going to ask the city clerk's advice based on the number of hands raised, based on the number of public comments that were received via email, and your best judgment if we should limit the public comments to 2 minutes each or 3 minutes each tonight.
We should limit to 2 minutes each.
Okay, so what I will do is I will bring up my stopwatch and I will assist you. And together we'll make sure that every member of the public who speaks will have 2 minutes. I want to make sure the members of the public know, I mean no disrespect when I interrupt you. At 2 minutes or shortly before 2 minutes, I'll ask you to please finish your comments. And at 2 minutes, we'll have to stop your comments so that we're fair to everybody and we have some equal opportunity. If there are significant questions that colleagues have from a particular speaker that may have particular expertise, we will entertain those questions within reason. We're probably have a lot of people who wish to speak tonight. So colleagues, if you do have a question from one of the speakers, we'll try to be succinct and we'll ask the speakers to be succinct as well. But I'm really going to try to manage the time of the meeting. So if any members of the labor community would like to address some of the questions also that colleagues brought up earlier, that would be helpful. I looked at my tally. I think we had 17 emails. I could have been wrong that came from members of the public, and I think 7 of them or so were from labor organizations, and some of them appear to be here tonight. So if there's anybody who wishes to comment on some of those questions that were raised earlier, we'd appreciate that as well. Okay, with that, we'll turn it over to the city clerk and we'll begin public comment, and we will listen and learn from all of you.
Sure, let's start with Laura Hines. If you can unmute yourself, Laura.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Hines. We can hear you and you have 2 minutes.
I want to thank Mayor Beach for putting this on the agenda, City Manager Lisa Goldman, and City Attorney Kathleen Kane for their research and staff report. The city of San Mateo has already increased their minimum wage to $15.38 per hour, and San Mateo hasn't fallen apart because of it. I appreciate that you engage the community through the SurveyMonkey poll. Burlingame residents in the poll overwhelmingly want the minimum wage to be $15 an hour. You asked Burlingame employers to list the wage of their lowest paid employee. Out of the 50 business owners who replied, 6 said their lowest employee was paid 12, 5 said it was 13, and 3 said it was 14. A person making $12 an hour only brings home about $1,600 a month. And a person making 15 only brings home $1,967 a month. We all know that's not enough to live in San Mateo County. To qualify for extremely low income housing, the minimum you would have to make is $17.57 an hour. Each increase of $1 only puts about $121 a month in an employee's pocket. The idea that a valued, respectable business depends on employing workers who cannot house themselves is unconscionable. And it's an embarrassment if we don't raise the minimum wage to $15. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Hines. Go ahead.
Next phone call on Aaron Chavez. Aaron?
Hi, Erin Kaiser.
Thank you.
Mayor Beach, Vice Mayor Keegren, and council members. My name is Erin Kaiser, and I work for the San Mateo Central Labor Council and the San Mateo Building and Construction Trades Council. On behalf of both of these organizations, their affiliate unions, and their tens of thousands of local union members, we urge you to implement a citywide minimum wage ordinance, raising the wage for all businesses and all who work in and for the city of Burlingame to $15 an hour by January 1st, 2021, with annual CPI increases beginning January 2022, strong enforcement language, and a robust public information campaign. While Burlingame is largely a prosperous community with affluent community members, many of your community members live in poverty. These folks are struggling to keep up with the ever-increasing cost of living. These low-wage essential workers tend to be the hardest hit by the coronavirus pandemic, and these are the people who will be most helped by increasing the minimum wage. Burlingame is surrounded by cities who have already passed a $15 an hour minimum wage ordinance. According to your staff report, there is no evidence in other cities here on the peninsula who have passed the minimum wage ordinance that businesses closed or that they converted full-time staff members to part-time as a result of the ordinance. Healthy businesses adapt. A $15 minimum wage job, even full-time, is not enough to cover the costs of housing, let alone childcare and transportation and food and medical services, which, as we know, are more essential now during this pandemic than ever. And those costs are higher for working families in Burlingame. $15 an hour isn't enough, but we do have to start somewhere. And I want to thank you all in advance for starting here. Thank you.
Thanks, Aaron.
Thank you.
Next, we have Erica Rincon.
Thank you. Good evening, Madam Mayor, Vice Mayor, council members, and staff. My name is Erica Rincon on behalf of Get Healthy San Mateo County, a collaborative of community organizations and local agencies working to remove social and economic barriers to health so that every county resident has the opportunity to live a long and healthy life. One of our key community identified priorities is fostering a strong local economy that builds financial security for all, as access to adequate income is one of the most important predictors of a person's health. The pandemic and the economic downturn have exacerbated the economic vulnerability experienced by low-income workers and created more hardships for residents. San Mateo County went from a 2.7% unemployment rate pre-pandemic to 9.2% unemployment rate as of July 2020. This is around 41,000 unemployed workers. However, according to a recent PolicyLink analysis, a more accurate number of unemployed workers in San Mateo County is estimated to be almost 150,000 workers as of June 2020. Then this number accounts for close to 100,000 San Mateo County residents that have claimed unemployment insurance, and an additional 49,891 unemployed workers that did not file for unemployment insurance. The reasons can be because they are undocumented, self-employed, and/or informal economy workers and are not eligible for unemployment insurance. Furthermore, there are an estimated 6,900 families with 4,105 children who are facing imminent risk of eviction in San Mateo County in the absence of a continued moratorium on evictions due to the lack of no replacement income and limited to no savings. With the expiration of the federal pandemic unemployment compensation this
Ms.
summer,
Rincon, I'm going to ask you to finish up. Thank you.
it's estimated to have grown by 5,000 renter households. So we have about 12,500 households in the county at risk of eviction. Thanks so much for your time.
Thank you very much, Ms. Rincon. Appreciate your comments.
Next, we have Julie Lind. Julie?
Thank you. I was trying to start my video, but apparently y'all have disabled it. Good evening. Thank you for giving me a few moments of your time. I'm Julie with the San Mateo Labor Council. Many things have changed in the world since we first came together to discuss raising the wage in Burlingame. Every one of us has been impacted by COVID-19 to some degree, running the gamut between those that have been merely inconvenienced to those that have lost jobs, lost homes, lost loved ones, or lost their own lives. However, none have been more impacted than our low-wage workers. If you look at the demographics of workers making minimum wage, they're predominantly workers of color. They aren't kids working summer jobs. They're adults trying to make a living for themselves and their families, largely by living in crowded conditions, working multiple jobs to survive. This is the same population that has felt the impacts of COVID most catastrophically. African Americans are contracting COVID at 2.6 times the rate of Caucasians and being hospitalized at 4.7 times the rate. And the Latin American Hispanic population contracts at 2.8 times the rate of Caucasians, with a hospitalization rate 4.6 times higher. In San Mateo County, 9 of our cities, representing nearly 70% of our population, will have a minimum wage of $15 or more in 2021. Most recent was East Palo Alto, arguably one of our county's more economically disadvantaged cities, and they cited the impact of COVID on low-wage workers as one of the main reasons for them doing so at this time. In reading the responses to your survey, the majority of your businesses are already paying at or near 15, and your residents overwhelmingly support raising the wage, citing cost of living and the need to be able to compete with the higher wage cities to attract a quality workforce. Further, they're willing to pay for it. They will pay for an increase in cost of goods or services should businesses respond that way. Though some of your small businesses will likely tell you this wage increase will cause them to close their doors forever, it hasn't been the case in other jurisdictions who did do follow-up with their businesses that complained. And while COVID has made things exceedingly harder, the reality is that if making this marginal investment in higher wages of your workforce is what causes you to go over the cliff, your business had other challenges. So please, as California decided to not utilize their potential for an off-ramp to pause the wage for the whole state, surely Burlingame, one of the most affluent cities in the most expensive county to live in California.
Thank you, Ms. Lind.
Thank you.
All right, have a great night. Thank you.
I'm going to read a couple emails that have come in. This first one is from.
Do you guys want us to ask questions? Excuse me, I'm so sorry to interrupt, but do you want us to save our questions at the end, or like for Julie Lind for her work on the Labor Council? I would like to at some point ask her a question about that particular waiver in the ordinance. Would it be appropriate now, or would you rather do it at the end?
So I talked with the city manager about that potential, and I think if we can keep them succinct questions and succinct answers, we can pause at this time if there's a speaker that said something or there's a particular question. So go ahead, Councilmember Coulson, if you have a question.
Yes, thank you. First of all, Julie, thank you. I don't know what your technical official title is, but I really appreciate you being here. But I do have a question for you. The waiver that we discussed, which would allow the unions to, through collective bargaining, exempt employees from the minimum wage laws. Simple question, do you or do you not support that?
Freddy Fazbear, I'm gone. See you guys.
Not sure what that was. So that it's not a simple answer. And my official title is periodic herder of cats. So that was introduced in some of the earlier ordinances and advocated for by our lowest wage workers, the hotel workers and the service workers. And it was, I think, as Councilmember Brownrigg alluded to give them the opportunity, should they decide via their CBA, to take a lower hourly rate, though this doesn't impact obviously the state minimum wage requirements, but to allow them to take a lower hourly rate in favor of having that money be dedicated toward their employer provided healthcare. So that was the impetus for having that included. So there was no outreach specifically to Burlingame on that issue, and it's not in every one of the local ordinances.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And Councilmember Brownrigg, did you have a question as well?
Well, I guess I have a sort of follow-up, and that is, does Ms. Lind think this is an important provision to have in this measure?
So this is not something that I am wedded to, especially if this is going to be a big stumbling block. I'd like to see your workers get to that 15, really whatever it takes, as soon as possible.
Thanks for that.
Thank you, Ms. Lind. Colleagues, while we have Ms. Lind here, do we have other questions for her? If not, we'll continue with public comment at this time. And I don't see hands up. Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Madam City Clerk, go ahead.
All right, so our next one is from David Morrow. He says, as a resident of Burlingame for 25 years, I am in full support of raising the minimum wage to $15 per hour by January 2021, with CPI increases in the following years with an enforcement mechanism. We also, one second. So then Tom Payne wrote in, he said, I encourage you to pass the proposed increase in the minimum wage. Susan and I have become acquainted with a number of staff members at the Crate Fund and other restaurants on the Avenue. We have learned from a number of them that they have to work 2 or more jobs just to survive in our area. Consider that even at the proposed $15 minimum, 2 parents working full-time would jointly earn about $5,000 a month gross. After taxes, they could barely afford an apartment in our area, much less the other necessities required to support a family. The proposed increase is supported by majorities of Burlingame residents and businesses who responded to the survey, and the incremental cost to businesses can be covered by a small increase in prices. Any Burlingame resident who's unwilling to pay a little more so that workers receive a fair minimum wage should be ashamed of him or herself. The $15 minimum wage is being adopted by neighboring cities around the Bay Area and across the country. A community as affluent as Burlingame can surely afford to join this trend. We can afford to grant our workers the respect and dignity they deserve. And now I'll go back to some of the public comments. So we have Terry Nagel.
And I want to thank Mr. Payne and Mr. Morrow for their written comments. And yes, we have, I'm sorry, go ahead. Former Mayor Terry Nagel. You have 2 minutes.
Good evening, Mayor and council members. Nice to see you virtually. I'll be brief. Back in the 80s, I used to hire high school students to do mailing, stuffing envelopes for $10 an hour. And it's a sad fact of life that the cost of living has risen far higher than the wages. So I think this is something you really should support. I'll be brief. It's going to happen soon anyway because of the state mandate. And other cities in the area have already adopted it. So you would be more competitive if you matched that wage. It's also overwhelmingly supported by citizens in the survey that you ran. And most of all, this will help people who are really on the edge of despair live in this area. And it's really hard to live here on that amount of money, but we ought to do what we can to help them. So I appeal to you to support this tonight, and thank you for your time.
Thank you, former Mayor Nagel.
Our next comment is from Mike Dunham.
Good evening, Council. Thank you for the opportunity to speak tonight. I wanted to reach out in strong support of the proposed ordinance. I spoke in, I believe it was February last time this came up. And one of the things in preparing my comment then I looked at was sort of like, what do economists say about this? And it turns out economists are very well studied in what happens with minimum wages. And it's actually the type of thing that I think you do need to be pretty data driven and academic about, because it's a very complicated situation. Sure, there are current businesses that pay less than 15 bucks an hour, and they might, theoretically, they could do things like lay off workers or cut hours in response. But they could also do other things like raise prices, cut costs elsewhere in their business, et cetera. So there's a lot of ways it could go. And I think what economists have found consistently in many different jurisdictions when they raise the minimum wage is that so long as you keep it to a level that does not get competitive with the actual median wage in the area, you don't have those kinds of issues. So when I spoke in February, the median wage in San Mateo County for a single earner was about $113,000 a year. In the year since we've had updated data, it is now $121,000 per year. That's median. 50% of people who live here make above $121,000 per year as an individual. That implies that now you could lead to a minimum wage of up to $30 an hour without even getting close to the effects that economists would worry about. This is not even remotely close to 30 bucks an hour. $15 an hour is very, very, very unlikely to have any sort of impact that would be measurable. The research suggests it wouldn't. You've also heard the human argument. I think the folks that would actually see their wages raised like this are the most vulnerable workers, the ones who are working essential jobs that you can't get on a Zoom call to do. They're the most vulnerable to COVID.
Thank you
the most vulnerable to displacement. Please support them. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dunham, for your comments.
Okay, the next we have some more emails. This one's from Alyssa Ferrari. She says, in conjunction with the California Restaurant Association, restaurateurs, including myself, met with Senator Jerry Hill in Sacramento in 2017 regarding minimum wage hikes. The CRA asked that tipped employees not be exempt from minimum wage, but that their total compensation, wages plus tips, be considered as their hourly wage. In that meeting, Senator Hill agreed that restaurants should be allowed to include tips in the average of hourly pay rates. To date, nothing has happened. If the city of Burlingame would like to impose an even higher minimum wage than the state, restaurateurs fully support the idea as long as tipped employees rates, including their total compensation, not only their hourly wage rate. Other states' minimum wage is different for tipped employees to consider their tipped portion. If this is not considered, you are only giving pay raises to the highest earners in the restaurant when that money should go toward the non-tipped employees. Restaurants are suffering deeply and are going out of business daily, which means the unemployment rate will continue to rise and sales tax revenue will decrease. A small consideration such as my suggestion could mean the difference of a business continuing operations or not. Our next email is from Kimberly Rosales. She says, a rising tide lifts all ships. It is a truism that guided my service and support of BCE as it did so many of you with whom I had the privilege to serve alongside. It is also a truism that should guide our support of a minimum wage hike in Burlingame. The very same principle applies. Our city has the great good fortune to have many high earners, but it also has many exceedingly hardworking members of our community who work tirelessly at one or several minimum wage jobs in order to secure their home here, and for many of those to allow their children access to our exceptional schools. They are our friends and our neighbors, and they deserve the dignity and respect that comes with earning a better wage. While for some of us, a few dollars increase in our wage would represent an exceedingly small increase in our annual earnings, for others it could mean a near 25% increase. We owe it to those friends and neighbors to allow the tides to rise. These are not the same people that support our local shops and restaurants, though they would if they could. Any increases in prices that might result would not affect them adversely and could be easily borne by those who do frequent our local businesses. Our income distribution here in Burlingame is not a bell curve, but rather an M curve. We are economically have and have-nots, and we have a moral imperative to do better. And we can do better and will be better for it. We are better for all of our wonderful differences in this town. Let us afford people of all walks of life the opportunity to live here and work here and make it a little easier to do so. You are all highly respected leaders in the community, but it is a long past time to follow the fine lead of our neighbors. East Palo Alto, Menlo Park, San Mateo, Redwood City, Daly City, Half Moon Bay, San Carlos, South San Francisco, and Belmont. Their tides are rising. Why aren't ours? And one more email before we get back to public comments in person. Thank you for providing multiple ways for the community to ask questions and engage in the conversation. We understand that tips and other benefits may not be considered as an offset to the minimum wage. However, in the past, minimum wage for tipped employees was different. Will tipped employees have a different minimum wage than the proposed 15 for 2021? The wage of our tipped employees is substantially more than the minimum wage with tips included. Okay. Raina, would you like to speak? Raina?
I'm here.
Thank you, Raina. We can hear you and you have 2 minutes.
Great, thanks. Good evening, Honorable Mayor and council members. I would like to be another strong voice in strong support of this minimum wage ordinance. I support $15 an hour by 2021. Burlingame is a great, I'll start my video, sure. Burlingame is a great place to live. I don't live here. I live in Menlo Park, a city of similar size and charm, where I participated in community advocacy in support of the Menlo Park minimum wage ordinance, which went into effect in January. These aren't normal times, but there will be normal times again. And the important decisions such as this that you will make now will support the economic vitality and stability of your city of Burlingame now and in the future. Per the informal staff survey, 30% of the Burlingame workforce is concentrated in the lower wage employment sectors, specifically retail, food, accommodations, and personal care. And given the numbers, these are backbone industries for Burlingame. Attracting, retaining, and investing in the local workforce, making it competitive, is a necessity. Businesses in all the 9 cities that passed minimum wage ordinances raised concerns. Some made very ominous predictions which did not come true, and anecdotally, there have been no closures in Menlo Park, where I live. Most of the businesses at that time were already paying more than $15 an hour, as are most businesses in Burlingame right now. Healthy businesses do adapt. Low-income families are the ones that are particularly struggling in Burlingame. Single moms with kids are having the hardest time. Minimum wage, please remember, that's $31,200 before taxes, monthly, not even enough to pay the rent for a 1-bedroom apartment in Burlingame right now. I'd like to thank the staff for such a well-researched and accurate report. In conclusion,
thank you for wrapping up.
But you're starting somewhere. Thanks for your leadership.
Thank you, Raina.
Next up, we have David Fleischman.
Good evening, Mayor, Vice Mayor, council members, and staff. I'm David Fleischman, Executive Director of the Child Care Coordinating Council, 4Cs of San Mateo County, member of the Child Care Partnership Council, and of the COVID-19 Child Care Response Team. I'm here tonight to ask for your leadership and support in passing a $15 an hour minimum wage ordinance. As you know, as we all know, this does not come close to a living wage in San Mateo County, but a $15 an hour minimum wage would at least be a step in the right direction, sadly. The economic disparities of this county are staggering. At 4Cs of San Mateo County, we have close to a $13 million budget for childcare subsidies for working parents, and this does not come close to meeting the need. San Mateo County and Burlingame certainly need a diverse workforce. It is the low-wage earners that support so many of our necessary and very desired businesses. And as is so often the case, this disproportionately affects people of color, and the childcare field here in the county, it's women of color. I really hope you will join some of your sister cities to the north and south from Daly City to, I think, significantly East Palo Alto in supporting families to live and work in our great county. Burlingame should definitely be an early adopter of a minimum wage ordinance. Thank you for your leadership and for.
Thank you, Mr. Fleischman.
Next, I'll read John Kavanian's comment. He says, my name is John Kavanian and I'm voicing my support for the $15 minimum wage. Almost half the county cities are at $15 or more. Our community employees work hard earning their wages and we need to treat them with dignity. Ask yourselves if you would work for $12 or $13. Burlingame is a leader in our county and we need to show our community that we care about our employees. Many great employees have left Burlingame to other neighboring employers for higher minimum wage. Please support $15 for minimum wage. Thank you. And our next comment is a Zoom chat and it comes from Michael and he states, this has been an incredibly difficult year to be a restaurant operator. Adding $1.50 to the minimum wage may seem like very little, but a 15% increase is not small when it applies to the majority of one's staff. While this is a well-meaning initiative, the majority of people whom this initiative is targeted at helping already earn a minimum of $18 on average per hour. Servers, bussers, etc., who make minimum wage are tipped employees and earn on average $25 to $30 per hour. The goal is to increase wages of the lowest paid employees, but in reality, this will increase the wages of first-time employees who live at home. San Mateo implemented a gradual introduction of a $15 minimum wage over a 3-year scale. We would implore you to adjust the timing to help us get through 2021 and rebuild our business before adding to our workload. And then I'll call on Nicole Fernandez.
Good evening, Mayor Beach and council members. My name is Nicole Fernandez, and I am a resident of the neighbor of your city to the south, San Mateo, and I'm also.
Ms. Fernandez, I'm sorry, we can't hear you right now. Could you unmute?
She is. I think it's her internet, maybe. Nicole? We'll come back to you.
Or for someone in the service industry.
Oh, Ms. Fernandez, are you there?
Yes. Hi.
You know what?
Can you hear me?
We couldn't hear you. We heard you introduce yourself and then it went blank. Could we try one more time?
Absolutely. I'm sorry about that.
And if not, you can call back if you want.
Can you hear me, Mayor Beach? Can you hear me now?
We can hear you now. Go ahead.
Thank you. Again, thank you to Mayor Beach and council members for taking this matter up, and I hope that you and your families are safe. I know that many of you, like me, are avid supporters of working families, and I hope that this council chooses to do more. $15 per hour is the least that we can do for the folks in the service industry of beautiful Burlingame, and especially in downtown Burlingame. There are others who will offer you data. I just wanted to come here today to voice my support. I encourage you all to go the way of your neighbors to the north and south and pass this minimum wage ordinance. And I thank you for your service to our community. Thank you.
Thank you. The next I'll call on is a phone number calling in. Its last 4 digits are 2488.
Yes, hello. This is Sandra Lang, and thank you, Mayor Beach and honorable council members. I've listened to the entire discussion and my comments are pretty brief. I think it's just about time that Burlingame do this. Also, if I had the best of all worlds, I really don't think it's enough, but it's really essential at this time that we do this. And my other comment is that this is the best investment that we could ever have in a community, because a community is sustained by the interrelationship of its workers and its community, the community residents, whether they're homeowners or whether they're renters. We need to really build and sustain that. And I think one of your callers also mentioned the importance of health and wellness. And my comment here is with regards of some concern about the exempted people from this. It could be home care providers or people taking care of children. And I would not want them to be exploited if they're exempted from this. But I really urge the council, in the interest of our community, to support this ordinance. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Lang.
We have some more emails. So this one is from Lori. She says, I work at Pick of the Litter on Chula Vista, and I would like to say that I support the minimum wage increase. Thank you for working to increase our pay. The next one is from Jackie. She says, I have lived in this community for most of my life, starting in 1981 and continuously since 2006. I am pleased that the City Council has taken this important issue of increasing our minimum wage, and I'm also pleased that we are not talking about this as a living wage, because it's not. $15 per hour in 2021 for an adult to support raising a family anywhere within driving distance of working in Burlingame is not a living wage. We can and we must do better. And I believe with your leadership on this issue, we can help make a small but incremental difference for our lowest wage workers. It's embarrassing to look at the data in the staff report and where our city currently ranks if no action is taken relative to so many other jurisdictions. This is a statement on how we value a critical workforce that serves our community. Let's make a statement to show we care. The fundamental question framed was whether our community is prepared to pay more for the goods, services, and meals we purchase in this town. The simple answer is yes. I hope you view it as a moral imperative to support those working extremely hard for a minimum wage in our community and vote to join others in our region in increasing the local minimum wage effective January 1st. The next one we have is from Raymond, and he says, I recommend that you consider adopting a minimum wage increase at today's meeting. While I can give you detailed reasons, the most urgent and compelling is that the surrounding cities are already increasing their minimum wage. If we do not act, it will leave Burlingame at an uncompetitive advantage when it comes to attracting and retaining essential workers. Additionally, we must consider that moving forward as a city, we cannot accept that the only way businesses can thrive is at the expense of paying inferior wages to its employees. Let's do what is right for our city and for the business community. And then we have Bob Baer.
And before Mr. Bear speaks, I just want to remind any members of the public who may be with us and would like to participate in this conversation, you can use the raise hand feature on if you go to the participant window and raise your hand. If you're calling in, you can dial *9, and that will indicate on your telephone that you'd like to raise your hand, or you can send a chat to on the chat function and tell the city clerk that you'd like to speak. Thank you. Sorry to interrupt. Mr. Bear, go ahead. You have 2 minutes.
Okay, I wanted to, first of all, thank the council for taking this very important issue on. I think Burlingame is a very expensive place to live, and we need to make it easier for the people who work here to actually live here. It's actually the fair thing to do, so I think it's pretty straightforward, and this will actually help people pull them out of poverty. It's also very stimulative to the local economy. If you pay people more, they're going to have more money to spend within the economy. I think it also helps people become more self-sufficient, keeps them off the government assistance. And then finally, it actually makes people more productive. If you increase their wages, they have better morale, and it's going to increase employer retention. So I would encourage the council to strongly support this and move it to $15 an hour. Thank you.
Thank you. We have 2 more emails that I've gotten in. The next one is from Mike McCord. He says, I strongly favor increasing the minimum wage in Burlingame to at least $15 an hour as soon as possible. This is still not a living wage, and it is still less than the minimum mandated in other local communities, so I wouldn't characterize this increase as too generous or progressive. In fact, it barely puts us ahead of the state framework for improvements in the minimum wage. Before the pandemic disrupted many businesses, I noticed some restaurants in town that always had a help wanted sign displayed. I imagine there are many dynamics at play in these businesses, but a higher minimum wage might help keep those positions filled. Please take care of the lowest paid workers in our community. And this one comes from Susan Payne. She says, Tom and I have lived in Burlingame almost 50 years. We raised our sons here, getting them wonderful starts at St. Paul Cooperative Preschool, Washington School, BIS, and BHS. While at BHS, they worked at Double Rainbow. At that time, the minimum wage was barely a wage for teenagers living at home, but happily their home was also in the city where they worked. The town we believe and feel is our home has changed enormously. At one time, Burlingame was a very sweet, not quite Palo Alto, that morphed to our core into a mini Rodeo Drive, and then to our pride and delight, came halfway back again. During that same time, one thing that hasn't changed is the trend away from affordability for our businesses' employees. Burlingame workers and residents have moved farther and farther apart, and sadly, for the most part, we know little about each other. Over these years, Tom and I have been truly fortunate to regularly shop and dine at our favorite spots. Many of the wonderful people on the other side of the counter or broom or frying pan have become our friends. We know about each other's spouses, children, schools, and jobs. We know that all of them have second and third jobs. We know that they work all the time and that they are tired. Will higher minimum wage allow workers to quit their second and third jobs? Perhaps their third, but it will help. Who knows? It might allow them to have more time with their families. Will a higher minimum wage supported by a majority of Burlingame residents result in higher prices? Barely. In a restaurant, it might add $5 to the tab. This is an affluent town. I suggest we will gladly pay it rather than knowingly watching things get worse. We will have done something. Thank you for your attention to this issue. And then I have Alex with his hand up.
Good evening, Burlingame City Council. My name is Alex Melendrez. I am a member of the Peninsula Young Democrats. I am in strong support of the $15 minimum wage increase. Everyone pretty much took my talking points here, from housing to personal health, but really fostering a strong local economy, as Get Healthy San Mateo said, has deep ties to personal health. My sister worked as a server, and tips were often shared, and they're not always guaranteed. So imagine that combined with student debt and rent. That's just one particular example. The impacts of COVID-19's disproportion on members of our community who are marginalized, who are people of color, particularly the Latinx community, who make up 50% of the confirmed COVID cases, mean there's a disproportionate impact on them as well. On a positive note, I kind of want to highlight how raising the minimum wage is actually compassion. I agree, I don't think it's enough, but it's increasing equity for marginalized communities in San Mateo County. It's protecting the community. What is that extra wage increase? It's additional food, it's prescription, it's paying for your essential internet bill, it's rent. There is a growing debt wall for those who have had their hours cut and have a backlog of rent. Those expenses translate to people, to faces, to names, to the needs of people who need an increase now, not by the state's timeline. Raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour is a compassionate thing to do. It will assist working families in the immediate. I appreciate your leadership in moving this forward, and I'm wishing you all good health and wellness. Passing this will help
Thank you, Mr.
others in their
Melendez.
health as well. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next, we have Chris.
Hi, I'm Chris Cannon, and I'm a resident of Burlingame since 1971 and a retired teacher. I'm committed to making Burlingame the best city it can be, and I care deeply about our city and the people who live and work here. My purpose in speaking at tonight's meeting is to support the ordinance to raise the minimum wage in Burlingame to $15. To me, this is a no-brainer, but I felt responsible to read all of the information, the data, the surveys, the meeting minutes, the staff reports, and the discussions which you've held in the past few months, so you can make this important decision. I was appalled and embarrassed to learn that the Park and Rec, the police, and the library had workers who received less than $15 an hour. These departments are the gems of Burlingame. And then I asked myself, what would my or your life look like if we made $15 an hour? Well, we would be poor and we wouldn't live in Burlingame. I really don't know what life on $15 an hour would be like, but I do know that it has something to do with human dignity and how people are compensated for their work. We must honor those who work among us. Most of the people responding to the survey, incidentally, I did not, indicated support for the $15 an hour minimum wage. Some respondents said it could cause prices to go up. Okay, I get that. If prices go up because minimum wage workers are making $15 an hour, that's got to be fine with people who are able to live in Burlingame, one of the wealthiest communities in the United States. I was also surprised to realize that so many neighboring cities and counties have adopted at least, if not greater than, the $15 an hour minimum wage law. Indeed, our own San Mateo County pays contracts and even early childhood education workers more than $15 an hour.
Thank you, Ms. Cannon.
We are way behind in this adjustment. I look forward to this ordinance being passed unanimously by our city council, and thank you for the opportunity to state my support.
Thank you, Ms. Cannon.
Our next comment is a Zoom chat from Kathleen. She says, completely agree with and in support of the minimum wage increase. However, please understand and consider not raising the wage as a blanket ordinance. Tipped employees make well above $15, as high as $25 to $30 in the case of restaurant servers, as that one other speaker had mentioned. If you raise the minimum wage of tipped employees, restaurateurs will need to make tough choices to cut hours, positions, etc., in order to just survive, since payroll is already a high percentage of the revenue. Thanks for listening. And with that, unless someone else wants to raise their hand, I don't have any more public comment.
All right, so thank you to, I see there's another public comment, and I want to, before we go to whoever just raised their hand, I want to make sure that we invite any members of the public. This is your last opportunity. So if you don't speak now, we're closing public comment, and then it opens up to a deliberation among city council. So if you're calling in by phone, you can dial *9. If you are on Zoom, you can go to the participant window and press raise your hand. And we'll give everybody one last chance to speak. And there was Ms. Bonini?
Yes.
Okay, go ahead.
Did you want to speak? Nope, I think she's no longer on.
Okay, last call. And if you can't figure out how to raise your hand and you can't figure out how to hit *9, you can unmute yourself right now if you want to speak. Seeing none, want to thank all members of the public on all sides of this issue for participating in the discussion tonight, and I will close public comment. So now that we've conducted our public hearing, it's time that we discuss it and determine, deliberate if there's comments we'd like to discuss among each other, and then determine whether or not we'll bring it back for a second reading and adoption. So I'd like to open this conversation up to colleagues, and I'll see who's got their hand raised first. Is Councilmember Ortiz. Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Again, we've been talking about this for a long time. It's not that it's something that's new to us. We've been thinking about it for a long time, and we've received a lot of communication. So I've really thought about this a lot. So what I thought of is the reality, and I think somebody mentioned it, is that most workers in Burlingame they're already at or near $15 an hour. This would impact a very small number. Also, with the state having their own timelines, I think that this will be taken care of in 1 or 2 years for the bigger and the smaller businesses. So we would only be creating, basically what we're doing is patching it between now and then. So it's not a huge impact. It's mostly symbolic, and I do believe that. Again, I've tried to hire people for entry-level positions at less than $19 an hour, and it's not easy. So in Burlingame, the market's already taking care of that. But I think it's an important consideration. And I think that having anybody making less than $15 an hour it is kind of awful to even think about it. So I'm really on the fence with this. And in February, when we were talking about it, it was an easy decision. But we're in a whole new world now. With the coronavirus, our economy has just taken a huge hit. Many of our local businesses are close to bankruptcy. So for me to add another burden on them to increase these costs makes it's really difficult to even consider. So I'm conflicted. On the one side, I see, I understand and know that living on $15 an hour is very difficult in Burlingame. But again, it's a matter of timing. Right now is perhaps not the right time to do this, to hit our businesses when they're down. So I'm truly, truly on the fence on this one. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Ortiz. Councilmember Brownrigg had his hand up next.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and I reserve the right to comment again. I think this is an important issue. But I wanted to start, I don't normally go towards the beginning. I prefer to listen to colleagues, but in this one, I wanted to go first to say that this is a hard issue, and not on the morality of it or even on the economic benefit, but on the fact that there are a number of small businesses who are struggling with COVID and the impact on declining retail and the rest of it. So I think we have to acknowledge that. And we have to acknowledge that for some businesses, probably not that many, but for some, this will lead to additional costs. Just to put it in perspective, the difference between $15 an hour and $14 an hour is about $2,000 a year. And if you're paying $13 an hour, then it's closer to $3,000 or a little bit more. So per person. So it's not a huge financial hit, but it is a financial impact. I do think that collectively, we've tried very hard to give support to our small business, and we are still working to do that. I'm proud of the various support programs we put in place and some of the creative things we've done to improve the retail environment for restaurants. I will continue to lean in, I know we all will, into whatever can really work to keep customers coming downtown and people frequenting our restaurants and our stores. But there's no good time to raise costs for a small business. I mean, never. You will never hear a small business person say, yes, please raise my costs. And if we were super concerned about the cost structure for small business, then we'd look a lot harder at the rent structure in our city. I think we're aware of how rents have gone up dramatically. And so I think there's a part of us that says, you know, I hope your business can make it. This is what, you know, the market's all about. So then it becomes, is this the right thing to do? And for me, that is just indisputable. So if you look, I mean, and I really think we're part of a bigger discussion nationwide. If you look at average wage rates across the United States, over 50 years in real dollars, the average wage rate has grown from $20.25 an hour to $22.75 an hour. 50 years, $2 an hour. That's how much wages have gone up. And we all know how much housing has gone up. This is across the country. So we have to be part of the solution that begins to raise incomes for the lowest. And yes, it will have a ripple effect on all the other wage rates. And that's okay. In fact, that's a good thing. Our country can't keep going with more and more wealth and assets and income concentrated at the very top and everybody else fighting for the scraps that are falling off the table. And like I said, there's never going to be a good time, but there's always a right time, and this is the right time. So I hope we can get 5-0 on this. I think it's the right thing to do. I think the vast majority of our businesses can afford it. And I hope that my colleagues will go along with this. But if we need to talk more about it in terms of figuring out a way to make it slightly better, let's do that. But let's not let the best be the enemy of the good. This is the right time for this.
Thank you, Councilmember Brownrigg. I see that Vice Mayor O'Brien has her hand up. Go ahead.
I would say in regards to this, it's well meant, but I think the timing is totally off with this. We do have to keep in mind when we look at the surveys is to actually focus on the businesses because they are the people that are paying the employees. And when we look at that, 30 were in favor and 29 were strongly opposed. We have to remember we are in a pandemic right now, and many of these businesses are already under a lot of stress. Many have been closed. Many are only opened for outdoors and not indoors. Many have applied for PPP loans. They've applied for SBA loans. They're dipping into their reserves. They're dipping into their personal assets also to try to pay their employees. Adding this is going to exacerbate those businesses. We fortunately have been a community that has really touted the importance of small businesses. And this is a potential way of seeing some of those businesses leave. We've already seen many businesses leave on Burlingame Avenue. I think we're going to see more. We don't know how long this pandemic is going to last. We are still in that purple tier as San Mateo County, the worst tier to be in. I just think right now is the worst time for us to do this. And if anyone is going to get laid off, it's probably going to be the lower income people because the businesses aren't surviving. And my priority right now is to make sure these businesses survive so people don't lose their jobs. That is my biggest fear with this. You know, the other thing that may happen, as I mentioned earlier, is that if they're forced to increase to $15 an hour, they're going to make up for the gaps of increasing other employees. Now, in regard to the restaurants, including all this and defining that you have to pay $15 an hour when they make tips and they are averaging $25 to $35 an hour is really going to hurt these restaurants. They're not going to be able to afford to do that. And that is actually a good potential of maybe people that were working full-time are going to go half-time and they may lose additional benefits. And I don't want to see that happen either. To say that, their businesses went out, but we don't really know why they went out, it's very hard when we don't have data in front of us. Now, I can see why, many of the cities approved it, but many, with the exception of maybe one, and I can stand corrected, made these decisions prior to March, prior to the pandemic. And probably many of us thought this pandemic may last a couple months. Well, it's lasted a lot longer than that. Also, just to let you know, there's been multiple articles saying that consumers have decreased their spending 10% this past month. And I know many residents are saying that they will pay more. I hope they do. I hope they actually, go to our local stores and restaurants and patronize them. But sometimes that's not the reality. And that's what we have to think about also. I have talked to a couple of the business owners, especially in restaurants, that said they're able to increase prices, but they will only go to a certain price point because then they start seeing a decrease in the amount of customers that they see, or they see a decrease in the amount of time the customers do visit the restaurants. So there may be people that visit the restaurants maybe 3 days a week or 2 days a week, and they might decrease that to 1 day a week. So that's something we also have to consider. This is a very difficult decision, but we can't dismiss the businesses that are struggling in Burlingame, because I have always been a proponent of the small businesses, and I really do want to keep them, and I want to keep our people working here. I don't want them to lose their jobs. But I think that is a really good possibility if this pandemic continues on. And if we're still in that purple tier, it's going to be quite some time before we are at full capacity. So my recommendation is let us try to help these businesses through this pandemic. And then once they're back on their feet, then reevaluate this. And then I think it's going to be a much easier decision once we know these businesses are going to survive. So those are my comments for right now.
Thank you, Councilmember Keegan. I see Councilmember Coulson has her hand up. Go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mayor Beach. Yes, I agree. This is a very unfortunate timing for what I would consider to be a very well-meaning initiative. I too am incredibly concerned about the 29 small businesses plus that will experience, I think, a lot of financial stress in the event that we change the minimum wage. I think I may be the only actual small business owner in this town, person who actually ran a small business for 8 years. And what's interesting about running a business is that the decisions that you make sometimes would not be apparent to the public. And I'll just give you an example. One would be that by paying a manager, so my facility manager, the most that I could pay in order to have her be able to afford to live in Burlingame, say, for example, $80,000 a year. If now I have other employees, mainly in many cases, they would be, high school kids or young people working 4, 5, 6 hours a week at my front desk. If I had to increase the wages there by say $2 or $3 an hour, I would work very hard to try to do it over time. But to start, we always had to start, at a reasonable level. Then what I would have to do, because it's kind of a zero-sum game, the elasticity of demand for your product, there's not a lot of people who want to pay more for your things. In this particular case of the business that I was running, the way you would make that up is you would have to reduce your 35-year-old single mother who's managing your business. You would have to reduce her compensation to non-livable wage in Burlingame in order to pay more to the 4 and 5 hour, student employees. So I think each and every business is incredibly unique, and the business owners in this town, from what I can see, make sacrifices right and left for their employees. I've talked to business owners today who have gone into debt. They've taken out credit card debt. They've taken on obviously PPE debt and other types of lines of credit in order to continue to keep their employees on the payroll. So I have no doubt that the business owners in this town care immensely about every single one of their employees. They treat them like family. They do their best to figure out how to maximize pay for these people. But at the same time, after speaking to numerous small business owners, every single one of which today that I spoke to was a woman or minority owned business, they are desperately on the ropes. And I am very concerned that if we make this change, that those, especially women and minority owned businesses, will be vulnerable and they will be closing. And I would rather wait a little longer to see if we can get them through this COVID pandemic, potentially into next summer, before we implement a change. And I also just wanted to say to all those employers who are paying more than minimum wage. For example, I saw Panda Express, who was advertising $20 an hour. I want to thank them for paying their employees as much as they can. But that just brings back another sort of lens from which to look at this, which is corporate America can afford to pay much higher wages than small town America. Single, small mom and pop businesses in some cases are the ones struggling the most. And we hear often that our community likes the diversity of the more eccentric, smaller businesses as opposed to the big chain retailers. And the reality of that is they are harder pressed to pay up on this pay scale. So while I really support the state moving in this direction, my children were shocked when they found out the minimum wage in other states when they moved there for college and went to get jobs. So I'm very proud of our state and I'm proud of our city, but I'm very concerned about these small businesses. I also have to say that I am not comfortable with 6.10.060, which We had a lot of unions today who came and supported this. And if we are going to pass it, I don't see why they should be exempt and be their employees should be in any way vulnerable. I think that language should be taken out of the agreement. And I would also support removing the tipped employees because I do agree that their total compensation is much higher than minimum wage. And when you have to raise their minimum wage, it will come out of the back staff, or at least the businesses will not be allowed have the same amount of discretion to give their back staff people, back of office, back of restaurant staff more money. So overall, I guess I just have a tendency to think that businesses in this town are compassionate and do the best that they can, and that I am a little apprehensive to get government regulation around this time in the middle of COVID-19. So I'll just end it with that.
Thank you, Councilmember Coulson. I guess all colleagues have spoken. I'll take this opportunity to share some of my ideas and we'll go from there and see if we can get something done tonight. Lots of compelling testimony from members of the public written in and spoken tonight. So thank you so much for participating on all sides of this. It's important. We hear from everybody, and I heard lots of compelling arguments from colleagues and from members of the public. One of the most important things is that it's the right thing to do. You know, we have a huge wage gap between the rich and the poor in this region and in this city, and it's growing. And regarding the timing of this, I think it's even more imperative that we act now during COVID-19 because it's our lowest wage service workers on the front line of COVID-19 who risk their lives to keep our economy going that are suffering the most right now. So I think it's even more imperative that we act now. The other reason is we're behind. We're behind our region. If we stay with the state minimum wage, colleagues, what we're saying is that we're okay with our floor being the same as Clear Lake, Modesto, when by population of Santa Clara County, San Mateo County, and San Francisco County, so from Milpitas all the way up to San Francisco, by January 1st, 2021, by population, about 84%, could be around 84% will be at $15 or higher. Some of those communities are already at $16.05, $16.07, and are going to be increased by CPI. So we're saying we're okay. That we're just the state minimum to the most poorest communities in the state. I don't think that's conscionable. Our community told us in the survey and in conversations I've had over the last year since I was running for re-election talking about this, that they support, they will pay more for their goods and service to offset the cost of these wage increases. And by and large, they said, the survey said over 73% said, and then even some of the businesses tipped in that favor. Look, we know businesses are hurting right now. I hear you. I think every single one of us, Councilmember Brownridge spoke eloquently about businesses suffering, Vice Mayor, Councilmember Coulson, Councilmember Ortiz. That's why we've spent the majority of our time over the last 6 months since COVID-19. If you look at our meeting agendas and the time we've spent doing everything we can to help businesses, particularly small businesses, with direct subsidy and with policy decisions, sometimes very controversial ones, to lean in and to help them at this time. I don't regret a single minute, but I feel like we have to tip the balance also and recognize that the low-wage workers working there, the frontline low-wage workers, need some help right now too. When I've talked with industry experts, when I've talked with restaurateurs who own restaurants both here in Burlingame and in other cities. I spoke with one today who owns restaurants in San Francisco, Burlingame, and Palo Alto. They don't love the idea. He said to me, it's probably the right thing to do. And it's never going to be something they're excited about. Another restaurateur I spoke with 2 weeks ago said, it'll be okay. That restaurateur also has a restaurant in Menlo Park. what industry experts, what restaurateurs and other communities say, in watching what's happened in other communities, in reading the detailed findings on minimum wage ordinances in other cities that have gone before us, the findings show that a modest price increase for restaurants can help offset these costs. And if the community is willing to pay it, it'll be okay. It's never convenient. There's going to be many things. This pandemic is going to take many of our businesses. It already has. I agree with the vice mayor. Look, Sur La Taub's going out. Gap is gone. We're going to lose more. But this wage increase, there's been statistics that say anywhere 3 to 5% of a menu price increase. One city ordinance said over the course of 4 years, a 7% increase for restaurants, and retail is more like under 2%. Whatever it is, I don't know what that number is, but a modest price increase can see it through, and this community can rise to the occasion. They've told us so. And I think we have to ask ourselves, are the people that are currently able and willing to be out there supporting our local restaurants right now, buying that takeout food? There's huge heartstrings to support our local businesses, shopping in our local retail. If they're able to afford it now, even during the pandemic, are they willing to pay a little bit more to keep doing it? My instinct says the answer is yes. We heard from a few restaurant comments tonight that folks working in restaurants for tips are making anywhere, as you said, Councilmember Cole said, $18 an hour averaging. Even $25 to $30 an hour was the higher end that mentioned. I've talked to restaurateurs that even say sometimes on the really high end restaurants could make pre-COVID, $40, $45 an hour. My friends, let us remember here in the Bay Area, if you're making $30 an hour, that's under $60,000 a year. $60,900 qualifies for very low income housing. Do we think that's a great deal for the servers? In fact, you can make up to 97,000 something. I took the chart out and qualify for low income housing, but very low is $60,000 a year. That's about $30 an hour. So I don't think that's really something to celebrate for, and they're doing better. Thank goodness they're doing better than a straight 15 an hour. But I think we have to recognize that there's a lot of working people here. In fact, one of the restaurateurs that I spoke with acknowledges the 25 to 30, that most of his staff goes and works a second job elsewhere. Look, the last thing I'll say before we deliberate, we have talked a lot this year, particularly about diversity, inclusion, race relations, Black Lives Matters. The data shows overwhelmingly, and the public has talked to it tonight, people of color are working in the lowest wage service jobs. And we have a lot of them here in Burlingame. We have hospitality industry, restaurant, and retail. Disproportionately more people of color are working in these low wage jobs. There's an index report that I sent this data via PF to the city manager to share with colleagues. If you haven't received it yet, she can forward it to you. There's some stunning statistics about people of color earning such little money. There's a graph in there, per capita income by race and ethnicity in the Silicon Valley. That's Santa Clara and San Mateo counties. So basically that's the average income per person. In 2018, Blacks make just over $40,000. Hispanic and Latino, per capita income by race and ethnicity, under $30,000. Those are minimum wage workers. White people per capita make an average of $82,810. There's another statistic in there about self-sufficiency standards. Get this. Self-sufficiency standard means you don't need public assistance or nonprofit assistance. Some people talked about this wage will help people be more self-sufficient. Well, 45% of Black householders live below the self-sufficiency standard in Santa Clara and San Mateo County combined. That number increases to 57% of Hispanic or Latino, 73% for single moms. I think that's why there's some childcare advocates that joined us tonight. Look, people living below self-sufficiency standard at the poverty level, $1 or $2 an hour increase makes a huge difference in their ability to buy groceries, to pay their rent, and to get medicine. This is a huge difference for the lowest wage people, and our community can lift them up. We have poverty in Burlingame. We know it. All you have to do is look as far as the census data, but you can also look at our free and reduced lunch statistics in Burlingame. I verified that data today. We've got 12.3% still in Burlingame Elementary School District of kids whose families, can you get this? They qualify for a reduced lunch. In a family of 4, you can get a reduced lunch if your family of 4 brings in $34,000, 34,060. And you get a free reduced lunch, because these are federal standards. These aren't Bay Area standards. It's a federal program. Family of 4 has to make $48,470. That's at least 2 minimum wage workers. In the high school, we've got 14% of kids on free and reduced lunch. These are real families in our community. So yes, it will be a hassle for businesses. It will present challenges. I sure hope they raise prices, however they have to do it, whether they need a surcharge, whether they increase menu prices across the board. I have great faith they will be creative and can figure it out, because it's really the full service dining restaurants where this affects the most, because really our retailers, our counter service restaurants, by and large, are paying $15.50 in one case. But there are people that are slipping through the cracks, as we talked about in February. This is a huge opportunity in our little small way to be able to address some income inequality, to help the working poor. And our generous hearted community says they will support it. So I really implore colleagues. We're not even $15 an hour. We'll be at the lower end. We will be in line with Daly City. We'll be in line with East Palo Alto and Half Moon Bay on January 1st. And I'd like to also mention one other thing. There have been 14 cities in the state of California whose minimum wage actually ticked up on July 1st, including 9 here in the Bay Area. Most of them are in the East Bay. San Francisco ticked up as well. Other communities are doing it. I think by starting on January 1st at $15 an hour is something that the market can bear. Here in a community whose downtown really serves the wealthy folks of Burlingame and Hillsborough, among many others that love to come to our vibrant downtown. So those are my comments. I welcome further discussion and debate. I hope we can get to yes. I would be willing to negotiate. It sounds like the Labor Council isn't particularly concerned with that one exemption that Councilmember Colson rightfully brought up as a concern. So if that's what it takes to get to yes, we can remove that. I feel strongly we need to get this done on January 1st at $15 an hour. We need to help the poorest members of our community sooner rather than later. Councilmember Ortiz, I see your hand up.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'm intrigued by the tipped employees. I think, again, one of the people who are suffering the most are restaurants. And I think that if we were able to carve out or change it to allow for the tipped employees to include tips in the calculation, I would be willing to support this. So I don't know how other colleagues feel, but.
Thank you for bringing that up, Councilmember Ortiz. I think I'd like to have the city attorney address that. My understanding, I've talked with some labor experts, that is actually exempting tipped employees is actually illegal, is my understanding, but I want to make sure that that understanding is correct. And perhaps if our city attorney probably knows the answer, and if not, maybe we can request that information from some experts in the audience. Go ahead.
Yeah, that's something that I haven't analyzed specifically under state law, that you can't, it doesn't work that way, but to the degree that we're looking at an increment over state law, I'm not sure what latitude the city has on that specific option. So it's something that I would need to analyze and bring back to the council.
Is there a member of the labor community? I don't know if Ms. Lind is still here. Ms. Lind, do you have we'll have to get our city attorney, but do you have a comment on that very briefly?
Yes, tip credits in a wage ordinance are illegal at the state level by state law. That's why they're not included in any local ordinances or in the state's wage ordinance, because they cannot be.
Thank you for that comment. And again, we can have our legal counsel, but I think that was a concern that I heard. Other comments or questions from colleagues? Councilmember Brownrigg, go ahead.
Well, I guess I just want to follow up. If, you know, if we can't make, I mean, to me, the nightmare of trying to figure out how much tip income is coming in and tracking that, I think would be very difficult, even if it were legal. It's, you know, I understand it's challenging, but if restaurants want to be more even-handed with their tip income, I think there are ways that they can do that internally. And so I guess I wonder, Councilman Ortiz or any of my colleagues, you know, if there's something that would make this work, bearing in mind that so many of our neighbors already have it, you know, is there something that can get this to work? Because I do think delay is equivalent to denial in effect, because next year is not going to be a lot better for the economy, and before you know it, the state will be in place. And I think, like I said a minute ago, we really should be leaders in the same way that we're leaders on housing. We should be leaders on how the least among us get compensated. And if it were some wacky number, if it were $19 or $20 an hour, well, now we have a debate. But we're not making policy here. We're not making law. We're following a lot of neighbors and, like I say, doing the right thing. So is there something else, Councilman Ortiz, that might make you comfortable?
No, I'm willing to go along. I'm not gonna fight it. Again, I think the timing's off. I wish we could do it to start in 6 months, but then it really doesn't make sense. So I'll be fine with it.
Thank you. Councilman Coulson or Councilwoman Coulson, do you, if the mayor's concept of waiving the collective bargaining provision, does that?
I definitely, I will not support it with the collective bargaining exemption. I feel like that's 8,000 of your lowest wage. If you're really, I mean, I have that reason and other reasons, which is my very strong concern that businesses that are run by women and women of color will be very strongly impacted by this. And this is not a moral referendum on whether, you know, minority or people of color matter or don't. Of course they do. They always do. I just see it a little differently, that potentially 29 businesses, you know, that could be going out and all those jobs gone. I just have more faith in our business owners to do the right thing. And I don't believe they need to be spoon-fed by council. And it sounds like the vast majority of them are paying well over minimum wage. And the ones that are not, I'm sure are not because they are hanging on by a thread during COVID. So I think the timing is really bad on it. But I will tell you, it certainly is beyond my comprehension of why we would exempt all of our own employees from this, all of the hotel employees, every single person that works in a unionized grocery store, you know, anyone that works in a unionized hotel, you know, so I think regardless, that is good policy to remove that and cover all those employees. Because if you're going to allow those employees to negotiate, say, more time off for less money or better healthcare for less money, why wouldn't you let non-union employees negotiate those same benefits? It's one or the other. It cannot be one set of rules for the unions and one set of rules for the people who are non-unionized. And the rules are flexible and more flexible for the union than they are for the not. It's just not fair.
I'm sorry, I just point of clarification. So your fear is that the unions will use this to get negotiate lower wages for their members? I'm not.
That's
I'm
what, yes, that's what item 6.10.060 allows. If you are a collective bargaining unit, which means you're a union, you can go in and say, for example, if you're a hotel worker and you're working, you know, you're the lowest income hotel worker, you can say, I'm willing to take $13 an hour for a little bit better of a, say, for example, healthcare. And I personally have no issue if that's the way people want to go. My issue is that then why can't private sector people be allowed those same freedoms to negotiate those items? And we're taking that away from the private sector by saying you have to pay minimum wage no matter what. Even if the employer says, well, I can pay you better healthcare, or I can give you transportation money or whatever, but I can only pay you $14 an hour. Why does the union get to do that and private sector does not? It doesn't make sense to me.
No, I appreciate your bringing out that concern of inconsistency. And I think what we heard from both Councilmember Brownrigg and myself and Councilmember Ortiz, it sounds like we're okay with removing that clause and reworking that. And that's good news, I think, of moving in the right direction. Vice Mayor O'Brien, I see you have your hand up.
I actually had my hand up early. It was actually in regards to the restaurants and the tipping. So the question was already answered. And you have to remember, like, hair salons and nail salons would go under that category too. I mean, we are lucky in Burlingame that we have quite a few minority-owned businesses here. And I would just hate to see them go out of business when they're already struggling. I mean, the business, when you look at the surveys of the businesses, like I said earlier, they're evenly divided. You know, 30 are for it, 29 are opposed. And I know you mentioned San Francisco. I'm not sure if you've been up there lately, but that whole place is boarded up. I don't want Burlingame to be that way. I want to try to keep these businesses opened. And would I want to see everyone make that minimum 15? Absolutely. But since the businesses are struggling so much now, and they're paying out more money because of the PPE requirements, and luckily, you know, all of us on this council helped relieve some of those expenses, they're still going to be paying those expenses for quite some time. So, for Councilmember Brownrigg to say to delay this is saying a denial, that's not true. That is not my intention here. My intention here is to make sure businesses survive. And luckily, the majority of businesses are paying the minimum $15 and more, but there are the few that can't. And I don't want them going out of business. So I will not be able to, support this ordinance at this time.
Appreciate your comments, Vice Mayor O'Brien. I think what I heard, I see Councilmember has his hand up. Councilmember Brownrigg has his hand up. I think what I heard is that there could be at least 3 council members, Brownrigg, potentially Ortiz, that might consider entertaining this with that removal. And I mean, we could probably debate this back and forth and all have very valid viewpoints, but want to make sure we continue to move this to some kind of conclusion. Councilmember Brownrigg, go ahead.
Well, thank you, Madam Mayor. And I want to reiterate where I started, which is for everybody who's wrestling with this, because of concern about the cost structure for small business, that's absolutely a valid and very, very cogent point of view. I mean, it's absolutely worrisome for a company that's already worrying about how it's going to make next month's rent, next month's food bill, and so forth. So I completely get it. And I'm not in any way diminishing those sets of concerns. I just think there's enough companies that are already over 15, that our neighbors are doing it, and that it's the right thing to do. So I am prepared to make a motion. I would like to ask Councilwoman Coulson if she would join the motion without the collective bargaining carve out, which I'm happy to make, but otherwise, for simplicity's sake, I would leave it in. I'm not really sure that I do take Councilwoman Colson's point. In fact, I had the same reaction that it seemed to be a double standard. But it complicates things to remove text from an ordinance. So I guess I'd ask Councilwoman Colson if that makes a difference for her in terms of her vote.
I don't know. If we remove it, it has to come back. I have another month to talk to people. I spent the day today on the phone with numerous small businesses, again, all minority and women owned, very concerned with being able to meet the demands we're going to put on them. And I having also been a small business owner in this town, I guess I have a lot of empathy for those people. And if we lose 50 jobs and 29 small businesses that go out and 290 jobs, 10 at each business, that does not help people either. That absolutely does not help people. And the people who lose those jobs, these are nail salons, they are restaurants. You know, they're fighting with Panda Express. You know, you're talking big corporate versus the small mom and pops. These are all mom and pop. These are all small locally owned businesses. And I'm very concerned for all of them right now. So it would be very difficult for me to support this at this time. Again, I fully am happy that so many restaurants are paying. I think we need affordable housing and everything else everybody mentioned today, but I'm very worried about those businesses. But so at this point, for that reason, and because of this collective bargaining, I wouldn't be able to support it. I think you guys should do the right thing regardless. And maybe in a month I can talk to some, or 2 weeks, talk to some more businesses and my mind will change a little. But right now, I do not think at all that it is fair to exempt the city of Burlingame's own employees from this ordinance if they come to that agreement through collective bargaining, when we are then forcing the ordinance on private businesses. It's just not fair. So I hope you will fix that regardless of my vote.
Thank you, Councilmember Colson. As Councilmember Brownrigg said, lots of great points. I guess I'll just add one other comment to the mix. I think you're right that businesses will have to make some financial decisions, but they do have a recourse. They have the choice to absorb that cost or pass it along to the consumer in a community that says it wants to support their local businesses. The low-wage worker has no recourse. I think
Emily, you haven't run a small business in this town, and I have, and I'm going to tell you that you cannot always pass on the costs. I can assure you. I promise you that I have tried in different circumstances, and it is often very difficult to pass it on. So I respect your view, Councilmember Colson, and you're right. You've run a small business. This is what I am hearing from experts in the industry and other restaurateurs that have dealt with this in other communities. So I'm just sharing that input, and you can agree to disagree. I respect your viewpoint very much. At this point, Councilmember Brownrigg, would you like to make a motion on this item with, I would recommend removing that language so that we have a chance to get more consensus among the council of the language of the exemption.
So Madam Mayor, I appreciate that, and I would love to get to 5-0. But I'm also conscious of the time. And so I guess I'd like to just ask for the record, and frankly, for my own knowledge, the city manager or the city attorney to let me know how long it would add to remove it. So what does that, how does that change the adoption? Because I will share, as somebody who's done a lot of business and invested in a lot of businesses, including small ones, that certainty is the most important thing. And the longer we wait, the less time we give people to make plans and adjustments. So I am conscious of the sand running through the hour clock as well. So Madam City Manager, could you just briefly tell me what would happen if we were to make a motion to remove the paragraph in question?
So we would have to reintroduce the ordinance because that's a substantial change. So normally, if you introduced it today, we would bring it back for adoption, second reading and adoption at your meeting in 13 days from now, because we're on a Tuesday right now. So instead, we would bring it back for reintroduction. We'd go through all of this discussion again with, staff report, public comment, et cetera. Then if there are 3 or more of you who say go forth, we would bring it back to the first meeting in October for adoption, second reading and adoption. I think if I recall correctly, we do need to start notifying people in October under the ordinance what the change will be for January 1st. So we do have a bit of a timing issue there, the longer this goes.
One issue is that we have to have 10 days published notice, and with the shorter time between meetings, we may not be able to make that. Megan can comment on whether we can make that time frame.
And if I may, if one were to adopt this ordinance with the collective bargaining and the city were to decide in 6 months that provision, we decided to dispense with it, we could then amend the ordinance, could we not?
We could. And if that's the direction of council and what we want to do is to get this adopted promptly, then one option would be to move forward with this version and amend it right away. We don't have to, there's no sort of setback time required for amendments, but it would keep it on its original time frame to adopt the minimum wage per se, and then we can follow with an amendment, the meeting behind it.
Well, look, we always knew this would be a tough and controversial issue, and I'm going to make a motion which could get amended to simply adopt the ordinance as drafted. My logic is that collective bargaining agreements, which are driven by management and unions, affect private sector too. There's plenty of private sector unions, not as many as there used to be. And I have not met a union that has asked for less than minimum wage for its workers. So I don't know that this is a real world problem. I frankly share Councilwoman Coulson's distaste for what looks like a double standard. So if this had come without it, I would have supported it too. But I think in light of what I perceive as importance of signaling to the business community what the cost structure is going to be like in 2021, I make a motion to adopt the ordinance as drafted.
I'll second that.
Thank you. I heard a motion from Councilmember Brownrigg and a second from Councilmember Ortiz. This is time for our roll call vote unless there's any further comment on the motion. Okay, Madam City Clerk.
Councilmember Coulson,
No.
Councilmember Brownrigg,
Yes.
Councilmember Ortiz,
Yes.
Vice Mayor O'Brien,
No.
Mayor Beach.
Yes. Motion passes 3-0. Thank you, colleagues, for the robust discussion, and thank you to members of the public for weighing in on this matter.
And just to clarify, this will come back for second reading and adoption on the next calendar, and we will process an amendment right away on that to remove the union exemption so that it follows closely, and that will itself be adopted before the January 1 effective date of the minimum wage.
3-2, Madam Mayor.
I'm sorry, did I say it wrong?
Yeah, maybe I heard it wrong. In any event.
Oh, okay, 3-2. That passes, and it will come back, as the city attorney mentioned, for a second reading. All right, thank you, everybody, for participation in that important conversation. Item number 10, staff reports and communications. I don't think we have anything there. It says public comment. I'm not used to seeing it like that. We usually have such fuller agendas at this time. Madam City Clerk, do we have any other public comments at this time?
No.
Okay. Item number 11, council committee and activities reports and announcements. Does anybody have anything they would like to add? If not, we can summarize them in at the next meeting or in the future written reports. Seeing none, we'll move on to item number 12, future agenda items. Seeing no hands raised, We'll move on to item number 13, acknowledgements. This is when we acknowledge various items that have been submitted to us, but also if there's anybody we wish to adjourn in memory of this meeting. Is there anybody that we've lost in the Burlingame community? Seeing none, we thank everybody very much for a thoughtful and respectful debate. Even when there's differences of opinions, we can get things done and we appreciate it. Item number 14, we will adjourn the meeting here at 9:38 p.m. Have a great evening, stay healthy and safe.